Hey guys, welcome back. This is a story about what if Naruto befriended Kurama early. After a life-changing event, Naruto meets Kurama early and they become partners and even good friends. With a better outlook on life, he meets many who want to join him and help achieve their dreams and goals together. Among those friends are many beautiful women. Realize just how important he is to them. Before we start, thank you for all of the support. It really means a lot to me. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and leave a like. You can suggest a Naruto fanfiction with a link in the comments if you want me to read it, and check the description for the creator of this great fanfic and support them for making this fanfic. So let's start. Fanfiction just in, not much to change in this chapter. I thought it was pretty good enough by itself, so I only changed spellings and bad grammar. I also smoothed out some dialogue as well. Warning: this story will contain mature language, sexual themes, and graphic depictions of violence and gore. Disclaimer: I do not own Naruto or any of its characters. Chapter 14. Everyone's got issues. Early one morning in Saki's bedroom in the Haruno household, sunlight shone in from the bedroom's lone window through a crack in the curtain. The thin beam of light crept up the well-worn hardwood floor toward a queen-sized bed sitting in the middle of the room and up onto its rumpled sheets. The light usually found a single woman sleeping comfortably in her bed many mornings for years. This time, it was now crawling across two distinct bodies under the sheets. Yumino Iruka was laying on his side with his head propped up on his left arm. He was awake, naked under the sheets, and silently watching the other occupant of this bed with an affectionate smile. She was cuddled tightly into his chest with her left leg high up on his hip and her left arm draped over his side. She was just as naked too, as Iruka was constantly reminded by the seemingly unlimited expanse of sinfully soft and creamy skin pressed up against him. Haruno Sake was sleeping peacefully, using her other arm as a pillow with her shoulder-length pink hair splayed out behind. Her small and kissable lips were slightly parted, allowing her gentle breathing to caress Iruka's chest, tickling it a little. As his eyes took in the curves of her body, especially her perky and shapely B-cup breasts and the wide and tempting hips she occasionally swayed in front of him, he let his mind wander a little to something a bit more serious for the moment. For the past week, he had been letting what his friend said bother him. Koyo had suggested that Uzumaki Naruto was to be watched closely, but he found it hard to believe that a notorious prankster like the blonde would have taken schoolwork seriously. To be honest, with all the time that he spent on pranks and getting into trouble, the sensei was surprised Naruto remained firmly in the middle of the field in terms of grades and skills. He could have been the class doby, yet he did just enough to get average scores. That niggled at Iruka's consciousness a little, as he wondered if Naruto was actually not even doing his best at all. He knew he was going to run out of patience soon and try something to confirm if Naruto had been hiding his potential or not. Having just decided that, he was jolted out of his train of thought when he felt a slight stirring in the woman cuddled up against his chest. Sake was beginning to wake up, but she still had her eyes closed. Sporting a mischievous grin, he decided to give her a nice wake-up call. Sake was almost surprised to feel some unfamiliar warmth and sensation next to her in bed that hadn't been there in the years since her husband passed away in an accident. She smiled slightly as she remembered last night after her very successful third date with Iruka, and absolutely relished the warmth her new lover's shinobi-trained body was radiating. She was about to open her eyes when she received a very pleasant shock and couldn't contain a surprised gasp that escaped her mouth. Iruka had reached down under the sheets to touch all fingertips of his right hand to a erogenous spot on the outside of Saki's thigh he found last night. He felt his lover's body stiffen a little, and, because her leg was wrapped around his hips, he easily felt the flexing of the muscles in the thigh as she lightly clenched her toes in surprised pleasure. His body tingled pleasantly upon feeling and hearing Saki's surprise, but her eyes were still closed. He then slowly moved his fingertips up her thigh and felt her shiver. A quiet but happy moan forced itself out of Saki's throat as she opened her emerald eyes to gaze lustfully into a pair of mischievous black eyes. The woman smiled dazzlingly as she began to writhe under Iruka's ministrations as he continued slowly ghosting his fingertips up the hips, onto the side of her torso, before inching close to one of her delectable mounds. At this point, Sake was whimpering quietly and arching her body into the touch, desperate for more skin contact. Haruka decided to tease her by tracing his fingertips painfully slow once around her left breast, making her growl quietly in frustration, before he finally cupped it. Sake moaned throatily as she felt her sensitive breast respond enthusiastically to the rough texture of Ayurka's hand. For the scarred man, it might not have been the first time he fondled her soft bosom, but it felt like it each time his sense of touch took in the amazingly smooth texture of her firm and supple mound. Sake jolted as if shocked when he delicately rubbed his thumb against the hardening dark red nipple. He carefully rubbed it for a few minutes while the woman continued to writhe under the gentle teasing, her leg tightening around his hips and her arm that was draped over his torso withdrawing to rub his muscular stomach somewhat frantically. In the meantime, Haruka slowly slipped his other arm underneath the woman and wrapped around her. Safe, was the only word Sake had to describe the feeling that spread through her when the man pulled her close enough that her body molded itself to his. Since her husband's death, she had worked hard to raise Sakura by herself for the past 7 years. Although she hid it well from her daughter, she almost had a complete emotional breakdown after Sakura begged her to give permission to attend the Shinobi Academy. How could she not feel nervous when her only daughter, the only true link between herself and her deceased husband, was going to throw herself into the kind of profession and environment that were unforgiving to women on nearly all levels? Especially if they were captured. She also often dealt with high stress in the cutthroat world of middle management until she finally obtained the top position in her bank. She did all of this to provide a comfortable lifestyle for her daughter and herself. She always thought she was strong by managing to stick it out alone through all the hardships just for her daughter, but there always was a small void within herself that she wasn't able to ignore on more than one occasion. Focused on raising her daughter, she had forgotten about her own happiness and the feelings of safety and contentment she was used to receiving from her dead husband. Last night brought everything back to the surface for Sake, and she felt like she finally found that missing piece of herself. The independent part of her hated to admit this, but she truly missed the addictive feeling of being safe and desired that only a man like Haruka was able to give her in the privacy of a bedroom. All of her worries simply faded away as if repelled by Haruka's arms wrapped around her, and she had forgotten how much she loved that. Sake smiled inwardly as she wasn't afraid to admit she would never think about dating other men because she decided Haruka was perfect for her. Each date only served to cement that thought further, and last night left her completely unable to imagine going through the rest of her life without this man by her side in any capacity. To normal civilians, this was likely moving too fast, but Sake somehow understood how most shinobi worked from her observations. In this dangerous and fast-paced world, shinobi never bothered debating major life-changing decisions for too long and usually followed their instincts. From the look of adoration growing in Haruka's eyes lately, Sake knew he was letting himself fall just as hard for her as she was for him. The only thing that worried her was his dangerous life as a shinobi, but she took solace in the fact that he was too valuable as a full-time sensei to see action outside the village's wall often for the foreseeable future. Finally, she had enough of being teased by Haruka's ministrations. She quickly snaked her hand up Haruka's firm chest and around to the back of his neck before yanking him in roughly for a soul-searing good morning kiss. After a long minute of passionate lip-lock, they broke apart for air and Sake let out another pleasant moan as she snuggled again into his chest. "Good morning, Sake-chan," Haruka murmured with a dazed grin as he moved his right hand from her soft mound to rake fingers through her hair, carefully smoothing out a few strays. Sake sighed contentedly before kissing Haruka's chest a few times, making his body tingle from the soft sensations there. "Good morning, that's a good way wake me up, Haruka-kun. You'd better do that more often in the future," Sake demanded lightly with a dazed grin of her own. They settled into a comfortable silence, holding each other for a few minutes before the pink-haired woman suddenly spoke up. "I can't believe you had your way with me 6 times last night, and only Kami knows how many times I went over the edge from start to finish. My legs are still twitching a little and I don't think I'll be able to walk right all day." She cooed in awe as Haruka blushed. As if to confirm her statement, her leg draped over Haruka's hips twitched slightly, making him chuckle softly before he continued in a worried tone. "I'm sorry, Sake-chan. Was I supposed to do it once or twice?" Sake giggled cutely at his slightly guilty expression. "Oh, Haruka-kun, you can do this to me as many times as you'd like. I think I'm one of the few women in this village that can handle a stamina freak like you." I guess all the time and energy spent chasing futilely after our resident prankster had to work out in other ways. She giggled again at Iruka's expression of mock indignation before continuing. You'll have to stick with me if you want to be happy in the love-making department. She slyly said as she brought her left hand up to his chest and spread out all fingers to softly caress it, making Iruka sigh in contentment. I never planned on going anywhere even long before our amazing night together. You do realize this was my first time and I most likely would improve with experience in the future. Iruka supplied with a mischievous smirk. Saki's eyes glazed over at the implications before she fixed him with a lustful look that clearly said he wasn't leaving her clutches without adding to last night's total at least a few more times. Seeing this, his smirk widened as he removed his hand from her hair. Saki's disappointed groan turned into a blissful mewl when he cupped the same soft mound as before and resumed rubbing his thumb over her rock-hard nipple again. Oh Cammy, please. I need you to make me unable to walk today. She begged huskily as she arched her body again into her lover's ministrations and was about to move in for another round of kissing. However, she was confused, and incredibly frustrated, when Iruka suddenly stopped everything and perked his head up, as if he was alert for something. He narrowed his eyes at the bedroom's door. I can sense someone coming to the door. It's most likely Sakura-san. He warned quietly as he glanced down at her for any suggestion. Sake growled in irritation before she reluctantly separated from him and sat up, pulling up the sheet to barely cover up to her bust. She glanced around for any place to hide her lover, but the closet was full and the bathroom was out in the hallway. Worried, she looked back at Iruka only to almost yelp in shock upon finding him gone. He even made sure to hide any sign that another person was in bed with her in that little time. Already missing the warmth next to her, she straightened up just as there was knocking at the door. She was relieved to note Iruka's clothes were discarded on the opposite side of the bed from the door, out of sight. She was usually messy with her own clothes, so her daughter wouldn't even spare a glance at her pieces littering the room. Clearing her voice, she called out. Yes, sweetie. The door slowly opened to reveal a younger version of Sake, only with waist-length pink hair that was brighter compared to her own shoulder-length hair's dark pink. Not for the last time, Sake wondered if such long hair would have helped her daughter with being a kunoichi or if it was all for getting a certain boy's attention. Sakura was dressed as a civilian in a red t-shirt, navy blue shorts, and white sandals. Her emerald eyes widened upon seeing her mother's state of undress. Good morning, Mom. Decided to do without your usual lingerie last night, she said with a curious smirk as her eyes seemed to search her mother's figure hidden under the thin sheet. Sake blushed and literally felt Iruka raise an eyebrow in interest from somewhere in the room. So what if an old woman like me needs to feel sexy sometimes? She grumbled, her blush growing. Sakura let out an exasperated sigh. Mother, you're a gorgeous 28-year-old woman with a successful career as a bank manager. You're not in the prime of your life yet and you already have a daughter about to live her own life soon if I graduate. Most women would kill to have your luck, job, and beauty. The only reason you took a while to get your position at the bank was because you had me early. Sake blushed even more and waved the compliments away. My beautiful flower, you know there's no need for you to hurry and be independent. Just please take your time deciding your own path before you even think of moving out. Anyway, is there a reason you came to see me? She tried to change the subjects while noting, with some amusement, that her daughter was not so subtly checking her out. Sakura snapped out of her small trance and blinked a few times as if to remember what she came into her mother's bedroom for. Oh, sorry, I forgot. It's just that seeing you like that made me think of how I would look in the future and I know I'm going to be so beaut. Sakura-chan. Right. Well, Ino-chan invited me over to spend the day and night with her. I won't be back here until tomorrow. Would that be okay with you, Mom? Hearing this made Sake want to jump around the room cheering at the top of her lungs for this lucky turn of events allowing her to be alone with her new lover longer. However, she had to keep her composure. That's that would be fine. I see you took my advice and decided to patch things up with your friend. Ha. It was more like an ultimatum. Sakura stopped her muttering cold upon seeing her mother's sharp glare. Not that I'm complaining, Mom. Just please keep in mind that if you had kept that behavior up, you would have ended up alone and bitter and there's no guarantee that Uchiha boy would keep you company. Sake reminded. She sighed when she watched her daughter frown. I may agree with some of what you said, Mom, but I still want Sasuke-kun to notice me. Sake pinched the bridge of her nose. I'm not going to interfere too much with which boy you like, no matter how wrong I think the choice may be. That's your lesson to learn if it turns out bad. The blatant insinuation that Sake didn't think highly at all of the last loyal Uchiha, despite most of the village's opinion to the contrary, earned her an annoyed scowl from Sakura. She continued anyway. Just please take your training as a kunoichi seriously and keep up your eating. I have my sources and I'll know if you've been slacking off and skipping your lunches with that ridiculous diet. I didn't let you beg me into allowing you to enroll in the academy just so you could come out of it weak and unprepared. You would risk being killed or, even worse for a young and beautiful girl like you, captured on your first mission out of this village. If I get on the same team as Sasuke-kun, he would keep me safe if I got into any trouble. Sakura declared with such conviction that not even her mother could try to rebuke her without starting a huge argument. Sake decided it was good enough that she managed to convince Sakura to improve her health and relationships with her peers for now. She would worry about her daughter's obsession with the Uchiha boy for another time. She flopped back down on her bed in exasperation. Okay, you can go. I'm not in the mood to make breakfast, so you'll have to get something on the way or at your friend's house. Sakura put on a happy expression and turned to leave. Here's a reminder though. The young Haruno turned back toward her mother only to have her face turn red with an intense blush. Sake had thrown off the sheet covering her body and was striking a sexy pose. It was the most beautiful body Sakura had seen so far in her life and she got incredibly jealous of her own mother. She irrationally decided on the spot that she wasn't going to let Sasuke meet her mother until long after their wedding. Meanwhile, Haruka was wondering how the younger Haruno didn't hear the loud whoosh of all his blood rushing to a certain appendage on his body in an instant while he took in the sight of Sake posing in all of her divine beauty. I never needed to cut down on eating to get all of this. All I did was exercise regularly for a couple hours or so every other day. Imagine what you could get if you kept up a proper diet and did your training seriously. Sake said with a smirk. She had to stifle a laugh as she watched her sputtering daughter stagger out of the room in a daze and close the door. After a few long moments, she heard the front door to her house open and close. She relaxed in her bed. So what's this I hear about you wearing lingerie regularly? I thought that incredible red number you wore last night was just for me. Haruka's teasing voice echoed around the room. Sake blushed. So I'm a little vain and I like to feel sexy underneath my clothes most days. Any complaint? I doubt it. Nothing beats your birthday suit, though. Sake smiled brightly and stretched her body erotically, purposely flaunting all of her best features to lure the prey out of hiding. Alright, time for you to come out and play. On a related note, you'd better not have any plan today, because I'm not letting you leave this house. She called out softly as she glanced around for any sign of her lover. She finally looked up directly above at the high ceiling and burst out laughing. Right above the bed was Haruka, in all of his naked glory, sticking to the ceiling facing down with chakra on his back, feet, and fingertips. He was sporting a sheepish grin. I suppose I'll have to keep you company, Sake-chan. He retorted in mock exasperation as he continued to stay up there staring down at her with longing in his eyes. I'm waiting for you to come down here anytime soon, Haruka-kun. Sake whispered his name breathlessly as she traced all of her 10 fingertips in a sexy fashion all over her upper body, especially in circles around her breasts, to entice him. I actually like the show from up here. Haruka teased, making her pout adorably, but she couldn't help but revel in her lover's eyes hungrily exploring every single inch of her body. She slowly turned over to show off her flawless back and perky rear end for his eyes to drink in. You got lucky just now. Sake purred as she turned her head upward with an impish grin. She started moving her cute derriere side to side in a slow rhythm. Oh really? And having you as my lover wasn't lucky, the man on the ceiling replied smoothly even as he was being dazzled by her hypnotizing butt. Sake smiled happily at that compliment before her half-lidded gaze moved to a certain part of her lover's body. With that big thing you have hanging from between your legs, it's a wonder Sakura-chan didn't catch any glimpse of it, despite your best effort to hide up there. Sake teased with a saucy grin. She got her reaction as she watched her lover sputter in surprise and embarrassment, and he lost control of his chakra for an instant. He dropped from the ceiling with a surprised yelp and crashed onto the bed next to Sake, making her bounce once from the impact. She shook with laughter from his goof up for a moment before gasping and becoming still when she felt a warm and muscular arm slowly wrap around her abdomen from behind. She then was pulled in closer with her back becoming completely flush against Haruka's chest. The amazing feeling of being safe spread throughout her again, and it really was addicting and extremely arousing. She moaned lightly when she felt Haruka's lips ghosting gently and slowly up the side of her neck toward her ear. They inched close enough to almost touch her earlobe but not quite. "You little minx." Haruka's husky whisper with the warm breath on her sensitive earlobe made her eyes flutter and her whole body shivered. Her breathing hitched each time she felt him slowly plant a light kiss back down her neck onto her shoulder, and she became acutely aware of his hand on her abdomen inching its way slowly down to the hot and soaked spot between her instinctively opening legs. Her initial gasps gave way to passionate moans as Haruka proceeded to show her what he thought was the appropriate punishment for teasing. Soon at the academy's target range. Thunk. A satisfying sound echoed throughout the shuriken throwing range. Haruka smiled as he marked down another perfect 25 next to Uzumaki Naruto on his clipboard. Next to him was his blonde nemesis with an outstretched hand in front of him. The boy stood at one end of a long target range with life-sized dummies set at certain distances from him. He had just hit the farthest target, set at 50 meters, in one of its eyes, a most likely fatal wound on a real human. That was his first attempt out of 4. He needed to make the remaining throws into fatal hits to get the full 100 points. So far, only Uchiha Sasuke, top in throwing, had been consistent with getting between 95 to 100 on each throwing accuracy test. In comparison, Haruka noticed Naruto usually got 75 points. Upon making the hit, Haruka and Naruto heard a mixture of cheering and jeering from behind them as the rest of the class picked sides and rooted for Naruto to either beat Sasuke's most recent score of 95 points or to fail miserably. Haruka noticed with a small scowl that Sakura was still passionately cheering the Uchiha boy on and throwing some light insults at Naruto. Sake was going to be displeased hearing his report on her daughter later. At least she hadn't uttered her usual insult of, "Naruto baka," for a while now. "Next throw," Haruka said dully as he returned his attention to Naruto. The boy nodded with a confident smirk and took out another shuriken. It wasn't obvious, but now that Haruka was paying extra attention to Naruto, he noticed several subtle signs of the blonde being too smooth and sure in his preparation. He barely managed to act like he only had novice instructions in throwing. However, the key word was, act. Haruka suspected Naruto might have easily beaten Sasuke if he felt like it from how he handled his shuriken and kunai like an expert. What puzzled Haruka the most was why was this amazing child in front of him hiding his true potential. Now that he was paying attention to Naruto since Koyo's words wormed their way into his subconscious weeks ago, he found signs that his student was holding himself back in everything. However, since he had no solid evidence, he couldn't confront Naruto about this. The boy was clever enough to worm his way out of any possible confrontation looking like the offended party. Thunk. The sound shook Haruka out of his thoughts. A quick glance down the range confirmed the second shuriken embedded deeply into the farthest dummy's throat. Another round of cheering and jeering and another 25 points next to Naruto's name on the clipboard. It was time for a small prank of his own on the blonde. Haruka knew from observing this boy's past tests that Naruto usually followed a pattern of 25-25-15-10 with his 4 throws, which added up to his usual score of 75 points. The sensei wasn't going to let that happen this time. He figured Naruto had set a predictable pattern because no student or instructor bothered to notice it until now, and was willing to bet the boy got complacent in his throwing, as if he was just going through the motions ever since the students first picked up shuriken and kunai. A little psychological trick was likely going to throw a wrench into the blonde's mental gears. Second throw. He lied slyly as he kept his voice to barely a whisper only Naruto heard to avoid any of the students gathered nearby calling the sensei out on it. It worked as he did not note any change in Naruto's focused expression upon hearing the deliberate misdirection, not realizing he was off count now. Naruto quickly took another shuriken out with some impressive dexterity and flicked his wrist expertly. Haruka's eyes followed its flight trajectory all the way to the farthest dummy. Thunk. The third shuriken struck true in the center of the forehead. Haruka was impressed because that part of the dummy was made thicker than the rest of the body to stimulate a hard skull, and the shuriken had embedded itself almost halfway in. It was a fatal hit, no question. He barely contained his smirk as he marked down another 25. His eyes flickered over to Naruto as the boy seemed to have realized his mistake in getting complacent, if the widening of his blue eyes was any indication. Haruka then wondered what his student was going to do since the lowest amount of points awarded on a hit was 10. If Naruto made another hit, it would push his score above average for this one test compared to his usual streak of perfectly average scores. On the other hand, he might deliberately miss the dummy completely to get the automatic 0 and keep the score 75 if he was desperate enough. However, that was a one-way ticket to constant jeering for the remainder of his academy days. Not even the worst student in class missed a target completely at this point. What's the total now? Naruto's eerily quiet voice drew Haruka's attention to the blonde, and his insides just about froze upon seeing an icy glare in his direction. Naruto was obviously really annoyed about his sensei tricking him. Forcing himself to look directly into narrowed blue eyes took a bit of effort, but he succeeded. S75. The next shot will push you up into above average for this test. I think it's about time, too. Haruka declared resolutely as he kept his steely gaze leveled with Naruto's. The blonde just closed his eyes in irritation and let out an annoyed sigh. Sorry. I'm just not used to any sensei caring about me. However, it's annoying having you meddle here at this point. He whispered, making sure his classmates didn't hear the conversation between him and his sensei. Haruka felt some irritation, and a little hurt, at being dismissed as meddlesome. I know what I'm doing. Just let me do my own thing, please. Naruto added, his piercing gaze boring into Haruka's eyes before the sensei turned away. Fine. I expect an explanation for this soon. So are you going to miss here at the risk of being jeered mercilessly to keep your perfectly average score? He challenged with a smirk. Naruto's eyes flashed with annoyance again before he then let out a calming breath and schooled his expression. No, I hate missing. I'm just going to make you regret pushing me this far. He retorted with a smirk of his own as he took out his final shuriken in his right hand and winded back much farther than Haruka had seen from the blonde. With a loud grunt he swung his arm down with all of his effort before releasing. Haruka's alert eyes didn't pick up the flying shuriken at all. Boom. The sensei and the rest of the class jumped at the sudden explosion. Haruka immediately gathered himself and cautiously looked down the range at the farthest dummy, now obscured by a cloud of dust and splinter, with a growing sense of dread. When the cloud cleared, the male onlookers' pained groans and the females' murmurs of disbelief filled the air as Haruka stared in stunned silence. No one noticed Naruto had already disappeared from the range. The dummy remained mostly intact with the exception of a jagged fist-sized hole where its crotch once was. Barely keeping his shaking hands from instinctively covering his crotch for protection, the pale-faced Haruka slowly brought his clipboard and pen up to mark the final 25 points. Yu Uzumaki and Naruto gets the top score today with 100 points due to his 4 fatal hits, especially the last one. He stuttered in a high-pitched voice. Not even the extremely pale Uchiha Sasuke could bring himself to feel jealous over Naruto's score and display today. Much to Haruka's annoyance, Naruto adjusted his total average to his preferred level when he deliberately limited himself to 50 points on the next shuriken test. To add more to his sensei's irritation, Naruto disguised this lower than usual performance by attempting to throw all 4 shuriken at the same time with one hand in the test, something he never displayed before that day. It took all Haruka had to not put down another 100 out of spite for the damn brat. In his opinion, Naruto actually threw the shuriken exactly where he wanted them to go anyway. It took Saki's soothing words later that night to bring her lover out of his bad mood, which slightly worsened earlier when she laughed uproariously upon hearing what Naruto did. Soon in the Hokage's office, "Burn, you little bastards. Burn, damn you," an old man chanted out loud as he glared heatedly at several tall stacks of paper sitting before him on his desk. "I'm sorry, Hokage-sama. That's not going to work." A male's voice cautiously called out from his hiding spot next to the bookcase on one side of the office. The third's shoulders slumped. An old man can only hope, Lion-san. Especially a long-suffering unable to retire old man, he muttered grouchily. Why not just use a fire jutsu to dispose of them? Yugao's voice helpfully interjected from the office's couch across the room from the bookcase. Because it can be traced back to me, Neko-san. At least if all of the paper here combusted from nothing but my glaring, any of you would say it happened without my involvement due to insufficient proof. You think we would get you into trouble, Hokage-sama. When we've sworn to protect our beloved and amazing leader from any danger, including mounting paperwork. Yugao softly spoke with a hint of mock hurt in her tone. No, I have faith in all of you to keep me out of trouble. The third replied with a grandfatherly smile before his expression instantly turned deadpan. You'd just blackmail the hell out of me instead. Damn right, all three hidden Anbu chorused with grins. After a moment of chuckling all around, Boar, who was hiding up in the ceiling just above the Hokage, suddenly spoke up. Oi, Neko. I've noticed you seem to get the nice and easy spot on the couch often lately while I'm once again close to accidentally shoving my head up my ass with a sneeze here in this tiny space. Is it just my imagination? I don't know what you're talking about. Yugao quickly replied in a too innocent tone while subtly shifting her gaze away from the ceiling, even though she was currently camouflaged. Oh, I do know. Neko-san was nice enough to blackmail me into assigning her that spot often whenever she's guarding here. That was in exchange for keeping quiet about my certain preferences in literature from my lovely daughter-in-law. The third clarified with a smirk as Yugao cringed upon being made. So you don't mind me, accidentally, letting it slip to Kanae-san about the literature you keep hidden in the desk now. The cat-masked woman grumbled as she felt Boar's annoyed glare aimed in her direction. I would have minded if she hadn't found out on her own, Neko-san. You'll be happy to know the talking to she gave me was the stuff of legends. In the meantime, you'll have to find something else to blackmail me with while you enjoy the lovely and comfortable spot up in the ceiling for the next 7 shifts here. The Hokage grinned as he felt Yugao flinch under her camouflage. We are going to have a nice chat after this shift on the difference between joking and actually blackmailing our great and wise leader, Neko. Especially on the folly of messing with the one who signs our paychecks and assigns us to as many suicide missions as he wants. Lion teased good-naturedly while Boar grumbled, but the promise of changing to a more comfortable position for the foreseeable future cheered him up some. The female Anbu let out a defeated sigh. A knock was heard on the office door a few minutes later. The third called for his guest to enter and in stepped Yumino Iruka with a determined frown on his face. The aged leader raised an eyebrow in intrigue as he watched the Chunin walk briskly up to the desk. Hokage-sama, I have questions about my student, Uzumaki Naruto, that I think you can answer as the academy's headmaster. Ah, what has he done this time, Iruka-kun? The third muttered wearily as if he repeated that line hundreds of times. No, he's been good, at least so far this week. He's been getting perfectly average grades in everything now, which is why I'm here. Iruka said nervously while the third stared blankly at his subordinate. No one said anything for a moment. And, is that an issue, Iruka-kun? I am not aware of any rule barring students with average grades from graduating. Hiruzen slowly said with a raised eyebrow, trying to pull more information out of Iruka with a gentle, go on, gesture. However, the wise leader caught on to where this conversation was heading, and awaited the young man's conclusions as he fought to keep a knowing smile from forming on his lips for the moment. It's normally not an issue except that I believe Naruto was holding himself back in everything. For what reason, I don't know, but I feel it's a waste of his potential if he does not try to get the praises and achievements he deserves. Iruka blurted out. He wasn't expecting the old man's reaction however. Alright. Looks like I win. Pay up. Hiruzen called out with a huge grin as he held a hand up in the air. Iruka heard grumbling from around him before 3 sharp whooshes filled the air and a small pile of coins and bills suddenly appeared out of thin air on the outstretched hand. I'll have to go after Kakashi-kun and Dragon-san for the rest of my winnings. The old man said happily as he pocketed his hard-won money. Iruka stared incredulously at his superior. What the hell was that? That was me winning the betting pool. The betting pool. Iruka repeated, his voice calmer and less bewildered than it should have been. The one in which we bet on how long it would have taken for you to notice Naruto-kun's true potential. I'm the only one that picked this week for when you finally found out. Sarutobi explained as he leaned back in his chair, basking in his victory. Haruka could only stare in stunned silence. When Hokage-sama assigned you to this year's class, we knew your famous professional attitude would have you pay close attention to Naruto-san's performance. We then believed you would be the first sensei to find out he was hiding his true strength. With that, we made bets on when you would put together the pieces. I had you down for 1 month after the upcoming summer break. Yugao explained as she appeared out of thin air sitting on the couch. Haruka looked over to stare at the purple-haired Anbu incredulously for one moment before he snapped out of it. Putting that aside, it's obvious I was correct in my assumption based on your reaction, Hokage-sama. The question now is, what are we going to do about Naruto? He should be recognized for his true skills. You know how tough his life's been and he deserves some positive attention coming his way. Haruka quickly moved the conversation along to forget about the surreal situation just now. The Hokage secretly felt proud when he saw that Haruka seemed to have quickly gotten over the fact Naruto carried the demon fox that killed his parents. Don't worry about this. I've been keeping an eye on him for far longer than you have and I know exactly what he's capable of. Please let him do whatever he likes. For now, he should be enjoying his time with his friends and having fun. The Hokage spoke with a stern expression. But nothing, Haruka-kun. He will be rewarded and recognized for his hard work and talents. You can be assured of that because I already have a plan for him when he graduates. If you say so, Hokage-sama. I hope for an explanation someday, though. It's just that I don't like looking the other way when a student is obviously holding back. Haruka grumbled somewhat dejectedly as Hiruzen smiled gently. Look at it this way, Haruka-kun. A major part of being a shinobi is to keep most information about him hidden for maximum advantage. In that regard, Naruto-kun is already the best student in an academy that trains shinobi. You just have to look at this from a different angle, not from a grade book. Plus, this is also making my job much easier when I assign teams after graduation. Hokage-sama. If he somehow ended up being the rookie of the year or dead last, I might have been inclined to assign him what may have been incompatible teammates because of that tradition of balancing out the top male and female students with the dead last. At least this way, if he remains in the middle of the field, I can assign him wherever I need him to go without grief from others. The third explained. After a moment of silence, Haruka let out a sigh and gave a reluctant nod. I suppose that makes a little sense. Thank you for explaining some of your reason, and I look forward to seeing the extent of his true potential someday. He replied with a hesitant smile before excusing himself from the office. Another moment of silence passed. So you hear Yumino-san finally got laid last week. And at the ripe old age of 23, too. That's practically over the hill in shinobi years. Lion's awestruck voice broke the silence. And just what the hell am I supposed to be at my age, Lion-san? Sarutobi growled in mock offense while Yugao failed to fight down her laugh. Hokage-sama, you're fucking immortal. That's what the hell you're supposed to be. Boar joked from above, making everyone chuckle. Credible source. Yugao queried as she stretched to get some soreness out of her body from sitting for so long. As good as it gets. One of my friends saw him slipping out through the main bedroom window at the Haruno residence early one morning. His hair was down and his clothes were somewhat ruffled. My friend thought nothing of it until he realized the implications yesterday. Lion reported. Your friend's a little slow, isn't he? Even a 5-year-old could tell Yumino-san got some from those signs. Yugao retorted unimpressed while everyone felt Lion shrug in weak defense of his friend. After a moment, the female Anbu suddenly stood up and exclaimed in realization. Everyone's attention snapped to her. I just remembered we set up a pool about his virginity. We need to find out who picked last week, she said excitedly. I did. A deep voice sent the room into a dead silence as all Anbu looked over at their leader in stunned disbelief. A victorious smirk was plastered on one Sarutobi Hiruzen's face as he raised his hand into the air, outstretched. One spring day at Training Ground 42, you're a tough bastard to fight. Naruto muttered as he shook off some numbness in his right hand. In front of him with his fists up was Aburame Shino, standing tall in a light gray trench coat closed all the way from bottom to top. The coat's tall collar and his dark sunglasses obscured most of his stoic face so that only his spiky brown hair was clearly visible. The heir to the insect-using clan that relied on logic instead of emotions shifted into a defensive kata. I would say the same about you, Naruto-san, albeit in more polite terms. The tall boy replied in an even tone that didn't betray any emotion he carried inside. Naruto just showed a challenging smirk. Let's continue. Shall we? Indeed. With a quick shout, Naruto dashed in to deliver a hard right that Shino effortlessly parried with his left. That started off a flurry of punches and kicks that narrowly missed each other as they both displayed technical excellence in their fighting styles, Naruto with his modified academy style and Shino with his clan's style that focused primarily on grappling and submission moves. The style was designed to easily transfer the clan's famous Kikaichu bugs onto the opponent via prolonged contact. Who knew the clan we supposedly viewed as primarily trackers and long-distance fighters would have such a nice close-quarters fighting style like this? Naruto commented with no hint of surprise in his tone while he gave a head slip to a palm strike that grazed his cheek while he stepped into his opponent's guard to throw an elbow to the sternum which was blocked by Shino's other arm. Naruto quickly transitioned his arm from the elbow strike into a rising backhand heading directly for Shino's nose. It was easily blocked when Shino quickly shifted his arm up to intercept it before he tried to snare the fist and attempt an arm lock takedown and submission, only for the blonde to slip out of the bug user's personal space in the next instant. It would be illogical to leave ourselves vulnerable should our opponents manage to get in close. Just as it would be illogical for you or anyone else to automatically assume us weak in that regard. Shino answered in his usual stoic tone as he stepped into feint with a left jab then a right grappling attempt that didn't fool Naruto one bit when he suddenly shot his right leg out into a powerful forward thrust kick to push his opponent back. Shino, upon seeing his feigning attempt fail, quickly mirrored the kick with his own right leg and both thrusts connected solidly with each other's torso. The resulting clash pushed both combatants back several meters until they dug in their heels to stop sliding any farther apart. Despite the exchange, neither really took any damage. Naruto flashed a feral grin while Shino's sunglasses glinted with intent before they dashed at each other ready for more sparring. Wow. Not including Naruto, I think Shino-san's on par with Sasuke-san and Kiba-san in taijutsu. I wonder why he doesn't show much of that skill in classes. Ino commented in awe as she watched the spar with Hinata, Shikamaru, Choji, and Kiba. They were sitting on the ground at the edge of the clearing to give both Naruto and Shino space, while they rested from their own training. Hinata, as expected, was watching Naruto with a contented expression, since she was happy that he was having fun. Shikamaru was watching with a bored expression, but anyone who knew him well would know he was analyzing every single move in the bout. Choji was merrily eating out of a bag of chips, but he was also watching the bout and learning as well. Kiba let out a yawn and stretched while keeping an eye on the spar too. Troublesome, Naruto's obviously hiding his full potential, even from most of us, just so he'll have people underestimate him. What makes you think he was the only one in our class holding back? Shikamaru drawled out as his eyes flickered between the two combatants. I could say the same about you, Shika. I wonder if you're actually fooling anyone anymore with that lazy-ass act. Ino shot back. What act? The pineapple-haired boy retorted with a confused expression, making everyone but Ino chuckle as she growled in annoyance for a moment before she smirked. With the way you're bombing the exams on purpose lately, one would think you're desperately trying to be on the same team as Sasuke-san and Forehand-chan, with both of them currently top students and you as the current dead last. Her smirk widened as she watched her longtime friend flinch in horror. Perhaps I should improve myself just a bit more. Shikamaru finally grumbled after a long moment of inwardly battling within himself on which was more troublesome. Doing more work in class or being teamed with that arrogant ass. Sakura wasn't much of an issue for him lately as she seemed to have toned down her fangirl behavior and applied herself more seriously to actual shinobi training. Ino-chan, I've noticed you don't seem to be trying to be on the same team as Sasuke-san lately. Naruto-kun was kind enough to tell us about how they assigned teams upon graduation, and I thought you would have made use of that information. Hinata commented. She noticed Ino's lack of interest in Sasuke as of late, and that she dropped the kun suffix. When they all enrolled into the academy 4 years ago, Ino was as much a fangirl as most other girls were, but her interest seemed to have begun declining a year ago or so. The Hyuga heiress also didn't fail to notice that her friend was paying more attention to Naruto as of late. She wasn't sure how to feel about that. She knew about Naruto's small crush on the beautiful platinum blonde, and she had mixed feelings about that. She loved Ino dearly like another sister, but she was also worried about the potential conflicts this would cause between all three of them. To be honest, she couldn't bring herself to put up a definitive stance against Ino's possible interest in Naruto. They were friends longer than she had been with the handsome blonde, and, as much it pained her to admit, Ino had Naruto's affection first, even if it was a small amount. Until Naruto finally noticed all the affection from the females close to him, Hinata decided it would be best to wait and see before establishing an idea on what to do about this. The pretty platinum blonde just shrugged at her earlier observations. While I could compete with Sakura-chan for the top kunoichi spot, I'm making use of that information to avoid being placed with Sasuke-san since I know I'm better off with Shika and Choji as teammates. I guess I grew up a little and realized there are better choices out there. He's handsome and cool in some ways, but that's it. If I actually dated him, I don't think I would have the patience to deal with his brooding after some time. It's not like I'm the only one doing this though. You're easily the strongest girl in this class. Hell, the second strongest overall behind Naruto. Ino smirked as she watched her friend blush something fierce at her compliment. Anyo, you're putting too much stock in my skills, Ino-chan. Hinata murmured shyly with averted eyes as she poked her index fingers together. Ino snorted, not believing her friend, but decided to let it go for now as she had something to ask. I wonder about this. Why didn't Naruto go for the Rookie of the Year? If both of you went for the top spots, it's a guarantee you would be teamed together. I would like that, but it doesn't seem possible. He doesn't care about that, and I'm sure you've noticed by now how most people viewed him for most of his life. Hinata replied softly, sad for her secret love. Ino nodded with a frown. She would have to be blind to not notice her best friend's treatment. All of Naruto's friends saw his poor treatment at the hands of the villagers and some of the instructors, but he avoided answering their questions directly, much to their frustration. They gave up after a while and just accepted it as something he would tell them when he was ready. It's related to that, Ino-chan. He'll tell you all soon, so please be patient until then. The pretty Hyuga added, still looking a little downcast. Ino smiled a little as she reached over and squeezed one of Hinata's hands for reassurance. They remained silent for a minute until Ino suddenly spoke up. Right now, I'm wondering how Naruto knew that particular bit of information about team assignments and why he had to be so infuriating about not telling us outright. She grumbled while Hinata smiled. But he did tell us in his own way. You make it sound like it was an inside joke between you two. Ino quipped while Hinata had to work to hold back an unladylike snort of laughter. Ino had no idea how close she hit that nail on the head. Naruto-kun did tell us when he showed us that mischievous smirk and said it was inside information with emphasis on inside. Hinata felt a little apprehensive about the fact Naruto had yet to tell any of his other friends about his tenant. She was fairly sure they would take the news well. In fact, they would be more upset that he held this secret from them for so long instead. That was still his secret to tell, but it didn't mean she was going to stand by and let this continue though. It was time for her to start making suggestions to encourage him to tell the others soon. Hopefully all of this would be resolved before graduation in 8 months. I wish they would hurry up and finish this. I feel like another round. Kiba's impatient voice and his dog's accompanying barks snapped Hinata out of her thoughts as she absent-mindedly watched her future lover and the insect user still going at it strong. She thought back to how the abrasive heir to the Inuzuka clan joined this sparring and study group a few months ago. Kiba had been stubbornly making a nemesis out of Naruto for infringing on his self-claimed position as the alpha. Unfortunately for him, Naruto already established himself as the true alpha, not just in his year, but in the entire academy, including the Chunin instructors, without even knowing or trying. Kiba, in his refusal to accept his instincts and his partner's increasingly frustrated advising, endured years of humbling losses to Naruto in spars and other competitions before he swallowed his pride and asked to train with the group in order to improve himself. He hadn't looked back since. Hinata knew Kiba would never admit this, but he was grateful to Naruto and the others for welcoming him into the group with big smiles. Shino's admission into the group was at around the same time as Kiba's and much simpler. He saw the logic of improving his skills with the group and just asked outright. The sound of a fist striking flesh followed by a grunt of pain brought Hinata out of her thoughts completely as she focused on the spar, only to be surprised to see Naruto sprawled out on the ground with Shino standing tall over him, displaying some surprise on his face as well. A glance to both sides revealed confused expressions from the other spectators. She wasn't the only one then. They all stood to move over to Naruto, who was sitting up cross-legged and rubbing a bruise on his cheek. Shino's expression changed from barely visible surprise to barely visible scowl. Naruto-san, while I firmly believe my taijutsu to be adequate at this point, I do know you're holding your abilities back to allow us to improve ourselves faster. It would not be training if we lose to you within seconds each spar. However, to play at losing seems insulting. His even tone was laced with a hint of being offended. Sorry, Shino. I never intended for anyone to feel that way. It's true I'm holding myself back, but I really did lose to you this time. Naruto replied with no hint of lying as he brought himself to his feet. That set off a wave of confusion through everyone assembled around him until Shikamaru broke the silence with a bored snort. Troublesome, you're using a seal. He stated this as if it was a sure thing. Naruto smirked while the others looked at the pineapple-haired boy in surprise. Leave it to you to figure it out already, Shika. Watching you sparring just now compared to before, there was a difference in how you held yourself. In the past, you had to make a measured effort to hold back for our sake. We may not like that, but it was necessary for training if we're going to eventually reach your level in the future. This time, you seemed to genuinely struggle a little, as if you were handicapped one way or another. Therefore, your statement confirmed it was most likely seals. Gravity or resistance seal, I'm guessing. Shikamaru concluded in his usual bored tone. Naruto nodded in confirmation of his friend's deduction. Seal. I don't see any on him. Ino pointed out in confusion. That's because it's not visible. Most seals painted on skin usually hide themselves after they were activated. Naruto replied for his fellow blonde. May we observe it? Shino asked the question that was on everyone's mind. Sure, if the pretty ladies present doesn't mind since I have to take my shirt off. Naruto said with a foxy grin. Hinata and Ino blushed at the idea of seeing him topless but nodded their consent. A moment later, his shirt was discarded on the ground much to the red-faced girls' hidden delight as their eyes took in the pleasant sight of his lean but muscular torso shining with sweat under the bright sun. He was just beginning to form a six-pack already, a good sign of his body growing up and gaining more muscle mass. Better choices out there, indeed. Ino muttered quietly to her friend with a saucy smirk. Hinata knew Ino was teasing her, but it still irritated her when she was reminded that other girls would begin to look at Naruto with lust just because of his appearance soon enough. However, she was surprised when an image of Ino running her hands up and down his torso sensually flashing through her mind didn't automatically make her growl and get possessive of her secret love. In fact, it made her a little curious, and a little hot, to watch her secret love make her friend feel good in front of her. Imaging him with a civilian girl she only saw once made her insides flare up in rage, so it wasn't just any random girl, but when she imagined him with a girl she and Naruto personally knew well and liked, like Ino, it made her very curious. It was like she was sharing a secret but incredible joy with only a select few. Even now when Ino was clearly ogling Naruto's muscles, Hinata didn't feel threatened at all. She dwelled on this confusing emotion while Naruto turned his back to the crowd and channeled some chakra to his back. I came across this little piece of work in one of the books Ero Sennin lent me and figured it would be a good way to handicap and train myself at the same time. This way, I'd have some fun training with you guys. I mean no offense, but I actually was getting bored having to consciously hold myself back. Naruto explained as an intricate seal matrix shaped like a pentagon, with a thick dot at each of the 5 corners, faded into existence, covering almost all of his back. Thick black lines connected to the 2 dots on the seal's left side were drawn around his body. One snaked its way up over his shoulder, then followed a winding path down his left arm before ending with another black dot on his wrist. The other snaked its way once around the torso before going straight down his left leg to end at the calf. If the other 3 dots around the pentagon were active, there would have been 5 thick lines drawn all over his body, as if they were actively trying to slow him down. Shikamaru frowned. Oi, you're already at level 2. Just how long have you had this seal? Since last week. Naruto's unsure reply caused his jaw to drop in shock. What's going on? It's rare for us to see you like that, Shika. Kiba piped in as he continued to look over the odd artwork on Naruto's back. The girls continued to blush as they watched some of the muscles in his well-toned back shift and flex whenever Naruto moved his head and arms around a little. Hinata was peeking adorably between the fingers on her hands covering her red face, and Ino was trying, and failing, to keep up an uninterested expression as her pale blue eyes hungrily took in every detail she could. Shino and Choji watched and chewed in silence respectively. You're telling me you skipped over level 1 already? Shikamaru demanded with a twitching eyebrow. That didn't do anything, so I just went on to level 2 to actually feel some resistance. Thanks to the sadistic teachers I have, I guess. Naruto shrugged as if this was no big deal. The Nara clan heir slapped a hand to his forehead in frustration and actually growled aloud, much to everyone's surprise. Damn it. Every time I think I have you figured out, you just blow everything to hell and I have to start over. He ranted at a sheepish Naruto. He exhaled slowly, then calmed himself down after a moment and decided to elaborate for his confused friends, although one of his eyebrows was still twitching. Troublesome. This is what we call a resistance seal. It increases resistance a person's body encounters through the air as if it grew thick enough that it's difficult to move around properly, let alone train. It increases strength, speed, and agility all at once as you do simple everyday things and exercises, and it continually improves every muscle you use without even thinking about it. Compared to gravity seals, a resistance seal takes longer to train with but promises a well-balanced body in the end. Gravity seals provide faster results, but they're usually localized on limbs and too harsh on a growing body. The genius of the group lectured to his captivated audience. Even Naruto was listening intently. Resistance level 1 would feel like you're trying to wade through water at a run. If one was to suddenly jump to level 2 from 0, it would feel like moving through very thick mud. The top level, which is 5, would feel like you're trying to walk through a concrete wall. Naruto is implying he's so used to level 1 he's getting around like normal that he's moved on to the next level already. It'll be a while before he reaches level 3 though, since getting to the next level increasingly takes longer each time. If he was to deactivate the seal in battle, his speed and strength would look like they shot up exponentially. He concluded to the stunned audience. During my spar with Shino just now, it felt like my entire body was moving a half second behind my mind, so it's taking more effort to make sure most of his attacks didn't go through. I also had to carefully plan out my strikes to not waste my energy doing useless things like I would have at full power. Naruto supplied as he picked up his t-shirt, not noticing the slightly disappointed expressions on the girls' faces as they thought the show was over too quickly. The boys nodded as they processed what they learned. Anyo, would it be possible to put this on any of us? Hinata asked shyly. However, Naruto suddenly blushed bright red and his body became jerky as he was tugging his shirt back on. He became so distracted he slipped an arm into the wrong hole and nearly tripped over his own feet fighting his shirt before his head and arms finally found the right holes. He still didn't look the girls in the eyes though. The girls wondered what was wrong with the usually confident and sure-footed Naruto. Shikamaru chuckled, as if he knew an inside joke this time. If he drew this on himself, he can put it on others as well. However, I think you'd probably balk at what's involved in the process of drawing the seal. It's fine with us boys, though. Shikamaru answered for the suddenly bashful Naruto with a smirk. What's wrong with us girls? Ino demanded with a confused frown. However, Hinata seemed to have realized the problem and she completely covered her face with both hands and a squeak of, "Eep," escaped from underneath. Why you'd have to be completely topless for me to be able to draw the seal on your back without any obstacle. Naruto finally answered much to the girls' embarrassment. Kiba and Choji blushed at the image while Shino continued to look stoic, but even he couldn't resist a slight tinge of red on his cheeks as well. Shikamaru chuckled at the scene, much to Ino's irritation before she cleared her throat. I guess I'll have to pass on that for now. She murmured demurely, her red cheeks a stark contrast to her pale skin. Hinata's dark red blush extended all the way down her neck into her light blue overcoat. However, for some reason, she suddenly had a shot of courage and decided to let a little of it out. I wouldn't mind, if it's you, Naruto-kun. Hinata whispered so quietly behind her hands that almost no one heard her, except for Naruto with his advanced hearing. That was her intention, however. His wide eyes snapped to her in an instant and was surprised to see Hinata slowly remove her hands, revealing a resolute expression as she stared back at him. Her blush was still showing, but her pale lavender-tinted eyes were unwavering and seemed hopeful, as if she was daring him to come upon an answer he didn't know he was searching for. Did she know he might have heard her? He spent a moment trying to decide if he was just imagining this or not before he was interrupted by Kiba excitedly asking to have the seal drawn on him. Shino was right behind him asking in his usual stoic manner. Looking back at Hinata, he saw that she was now talking and giggling with Ino, although a small blush was still visible on her cheeks. Naruto decided to put aside his confusion for the moment as he shifted his attention to other things. However, his mind lingered a little on the image of him carefully drawing the seal on Hinata's soft and smooth back while she was topless, and he had to admit it was a pleasing thought and he liked it a lot. Would he be able to continue seeing her as just friend forever? Did he want to? Inside Naruto's other seal, the great demon fox, Kurama, grinned wide in triumph, having heard her host's thoughts just now. A crack in his incredible denseness was finally forming, and this day couldn't have come soon enough. A couple hours later, on the way back to the village, Naruto's mind was still dwelling on what Hinata whispered to him about drawing the seal upon her. Did she really mean that? Maybe she only said that because she trusted him, like a best friend should. However, the way she said it and that look in her eyes afterward made him think otherwise. She was a beautiful and kind girl, and Naruto would have to be a blind fool not to see that. However, he always thought they would be nothing more than friends since she hadn't said anything or made any aggressive move toward the idea of developing a romance between them. Now that he was watching for any hidden intent from her since Kurama's heavy-handed hinting last month, he suddenly noticed the secret ways she was looking at him, the beautiful smile she displayed when he was happy or excited over something, the glares she sent toward some girls that looked at him in a weird way, and the way her eyes and smile still lit up the day even after years of commenting on how good her bentos were. After seeing all that, something told him she was looking for more from their relationship. Now he had to ask himself, did he read the signals correctly? Not that I mind, but you're staring at me when we should be looking ahead, Naruto-kun. A familiar shy, but slightly teasing, voice broke Naruto out of his thoughts, and his eyes came into focus upon Hinata's blushing face. Her slightly pink lips curved upward into a small smile as if she was secretly happy about something, and her half-lidded gaze shifted to the ground in front of her now that she had his full attention. The blonde had to force himself to break away from her beautiful visage to glance around, and saw that he was walking on automatic with Hinata back to her clan's compound. He blushed upon being caught staring at her, but Hinata didn't seem to mind at all, if her widening grin and reddening cheeks were anything to go by. Oh Kami, yes. Finally. He's looking at me differently now compared to before. Kami-sama and whoever else is up there, please let the day Naruto-kun sees how much I'm in love with him come soon. The indigo-haired young woman was praying hard in her mind as her eyes burned holes in the back of Naruto's head as if trying to send him a message. They walked in what seemed to be increasingly tense silence until she finally broke it. Anyo, she tried to speak before blushing and shifting her gaze downward again. She was nervous about something. You want something, Hinata-chan? Naruto hoped whatever Hinata had to say would move this tense silence to a more lighter atmosphere. Naruto-kun, I. Yes. Please draw the resistance seal on me, she finally got out in a quick burst after hesitating many times, with a dark red blush continually growing on her face the entire time. Naruto's hope for a lighter conversation was shattered as he stopped and stood rooted to the spot while Hinata stopped as well with her eyes closed in embarrassment, but she stood firm. Hinata-chan. Do you know what you're saying? He frantically shouted as his arms flailed around. Hinata kept her eyes closed but nodded firmly, her long indigo hair whipping around from the force. I'm not sure you heard me back there, but you'll have to be topless. You'd be able to cover up your front, but I would still see a lot more of you than we're used to. Naruto tried to give her a way out. This was going too fast for him. He was starting to see her as a growing woman, and now he was about to see a lot of her than he was comfortable with. Any more he had to say died in his throat, however, when Hinata opened her pale eyes and looked straight into his wide blue eyes and seemed to ensnare him with her determined stare. I trust you completely, Naruto-kun. You have no idea how utterly sure I am that you won't ever hurt me intentionally. Hinata proclaimed with such firmness in her voice that let Naruto know immediately he wasn't able to doubt her sincerity in this. He was happy and flattered at the absolute faith she had in him. It also made him terrified of hurting her even accidentally. He fidgeted for a moment trying to come up with another reason. Oi. Do this or I will test the theory on if you can die for real or not when I rip apart your astral body in our mindscape, repeatedly. Kurama growled from inside. Would you really do that? You know the seal will prevent any true killing intent from you and it'll hurt like a bitch. I'm willing to push that boundary if I have to. Now say that three-letter word that begins with A, Y, and ends with S, or I'll be using your bones to pick my teeth. The fox roared loud enough it actually rattled the mindscape. Naruto winced a little before sighing in defeat. Okay, yes. I have no problem doing this for you. Naruto finally said before he was engulfed by Hinata in a bone-crushing hug. Thank you. I'm happy to hear that. When should I come over to get this done? She excitedly asked as she stepped back, a hopeful expression on her face. Naruto had to chuckle at his friend's, or was it more than friend, excitement. When I discussed this with the guys, we decided this coming Friday would be the best time since they would have the weekend to get used to the seal before class on Monday. I made time for them in the afternoon after class that day, though. You should wait till later that evening if you want the privacy. At least you'll have the weekend to get used to the seal and hopefully it won't affect your everyday performance too much. He explained while Hinata agreed with the logic of this arrangement. Ino-chan will likely be interested in getting this as well. I think she only declined because it was in front of too many people. Would it be okay if I invite her along as well? I know she trusts you too. She added. She figured Naruto might be more comfortable with her if there was another person there, despite the fact Ino would be going topless as well. Naruto almost balked at the thought of drawing on two soft and delicate-looking backs instead of just one like he imagined in his original erotic thought. That was his old crush after all. He shook it off after a moment. If she wants to come, it's fine. Hinata nodded with a smile and they resumed their walk on the trail through the thick forest between the village and the training ground. After a moment, Naruto's expression darkened suddenly. Did you feel that? That annoying fucker is back. Kurama growled, her brief good mood at seeing Naruto making progress with Hinata ruined by a presence she was used to sensing over the past few weeks. I know. I was fine with this if it's just me he's spying on. Now that Hinata-chan's here, the situation's changed and I'm going to teach that bastard a lesson. Chase him down like the pathetic lapdog he is and put the fear of the Kyuubi in him. Kurama cackled uproariously, finally excited for a little bit of action. Naruto-kun. Hinata's whisper trailed off. She had just noticed Naruto's distress and discreetly activated her Byakugan to find a familiar figure hiding up in one of the trees about 50 meters behind them off to the right. Can you wait here for a few minutes, Hinata-chan? He's been tailing me for weeks but this is the first time he's spying on me with one of my friends. I'm not going to stand for that. I will not have anyone else, especially you, get involved. Naruto whispered darkly. Hinata smiled slightly at his fierce protectiveness of her for a moment before she became concerned. Naruto-kun, he's someone we know. I'm not going to stop you but please try not to hurt him too much. Naruto nodded before he stopped completely and tensed his body as his turned his head slightly, one eye locking onto where his follower was. The spy immediately realized he was made and jumped into full retreat deeper into the forest. The suddenly feral-looking blonde then fully turned around with a loud hair-raising snarl, his elongated fangs bared in full display and his blue eyes shifting to glowing red. Seeing his almost animalistic display of protectiveness over her sent a strange but pleasant wave of heat throughout Hinata's body that made her knees buck a little. When she snapped out of her brief wide-eyed daze, Naruto was already speeding after the spy into the forest and was swallowed by the thick foliage. It would be nearly impossible for the spy to lose him now thanks to his sensitive nose and ears. Hinata wobbled a little over to a nearby tree just off the trail and carefully sat down against it. She then instinctively rubbed her thighs together a few times and, suddenly, all of her being became completely focused on the waves of a new tingling sensation coming from between her legs that traveled all the way up the spine into the very roots of her hair, making her gasp and almost moan aloud. She silently thanked her caretaker, Tomo, for the embarrassing, but extremely informative, talk not too long ago when she started on the path to womanhood with her monarchy. Because of what she learned from Tomo, and the Academy's standard sex education lesson as well, she wasn't confused about this new but pleasant sensation since she now understood she was very aroused. More importantly, it was Naruto-kun that caused this and he didn't even intend it. I wonder what'll happen if he actually looked at me with want in his eyes. She thought happily and had to quickly stop picturing Naruto's beautiful blue eyes darkening slightly with wanton lust and love. Otherwise, she would have forgotten her surroundings and just let her hands do what they were itching to do for the past few minutes. Instead, she wondered if she was going to have to get privacy from her father and Hanabi later this evening to try what Tomo taught her about how to relieve herself. For now, Hinata just let the tingling fade away slowly, leaving behind a warmth that spread through her. She quietly enjoyed the pleasant sensations with a content smile as she waited for Naruto. In the forest he shouldn't have been able to detect me. He also somehow managed to make me lose my brush and ink in here as well. Sai thought calmly as he hid inside a nook of a large tree after escaping deep into the forest. He had just noticed Naruto managed to rip the satchel containing his art supplies off his waist during his escape. It was a close call because he was feeling hot breaths down his neck for a few minutes before he managed to lose his pursuer with a few smoke bombs and basic traps. Taking a moment to rest from the quick but intense pursuit, he worked over what happened for him to be found out only to realize there was nothing he did wrong. Therefore, his target found him out of his own accord. The only question left was, how long had Naruto known he was being tailed? As the spy tried to bring his heavy breathing under control and think over his observations of Naruto, the regular noises of the forest all ceased completely. He jerked his head up at the lack of sound and actually felt a small shiver go down his spine. Suddenly, a loud growl from his left made his heart leap into his throat as he instinctively rolled forward into a tight ball, barely avoiding a clawed hand swiping at his head. In the next instant, he heard something crack loudly. As he shot out of the roll into a ready stance, he spared a glance behind to see a hand-sized hole in the tree he was hiding in. The person responsible was nowhere to be seen. As the spy's body froze for an instant with indecision due to his inability to see his attacker at the moment, his head jerked upward when he heard another growl from above and was momentarily shocked to see an orange-clad Naruto descend on him, face set in an angry snarl and clawed hands aimed right for his own face. Sigh. He roared as he landed on nothing but grass when Sai rolled out of the way again. The black-clad root agent kept an emotionless gaze on Naruto as the blonde dashed forward on all fours with abandon, his clawed hands swiping at him like a furious leopard. Sai barely kept out of the reach as he scrambled backward over fallen tree limbs and giant roots for what felt like the longest minute in his life, keeping his black eyes focused on Naruto's clawed hands. The blonde swipes were getting more accurate and seemed to be focused on slashing at his pre's vitals now. Finally, an unexpected slash ripped through Sai's shirt in the stomach and he wondered how he managed to avoid having his guts spill out onto the forest ground as his pale stomach became visible and remained unblemished for now. After a few more seconds of avoiding slashes from everywhere, his back hit against a thin tree leaning at a 45-degree angle away from him. Seeing no other direction he could go in front of Naruto's ferocious charge, he acrobatically somersaulted up and backward out of one of Naruto's slashes and onto the tree to continue scrambling backward up the tree with chakra, keeping an intense gaze on his pursuer at the bottom of the tree. He was confused when Naruto didn't go up the tree after him. Instead, he was smirking before swiping at the base of the tree with a growl of exertion. Sai's eyes widened in shock when the tree was actually lopped off its stump with a loud crack. With the tree now free to fall, he let out a surprised yelp as he was brought down and landed hard on his feet. Unable to deal with the sudden shock of a landing like that, he was slow to move while Naruto quickly charged at him again with another loud snarl, an arm raised for a strike. Sai was actually getting nervous at the look on his target's face. It felt like he was going to be ripped apart if he was caught. Deciding to forget his orders on not attacking his target in order to preserve himself, Sai unsheathed his tanto from his back quickly and lashed out with precision at Naruto's throat, expecting to force him back. He was actually surprised to see the neck slice open and the shocked look in Naruto's eyes. That was for an instant before the blonde exploded into smoke, revealing a piece of wood. Sai was so taken aback by the successful kawarimi that he didn't even see the real Naruto coming at him from the side and, with a loud roar, slammed a hand onto his throat, forcefully dragging him back until his back hit a tree painfully. Sai grunted and coughed in pain but was already preparing to cut at the arm holding him up with his tanto before he stopped cold when his eyes locked onto Naruto's angry glare. The blonde reared his free-clawed hand back to swipe at his captured pre's face. The spy's breath hitched as he experienced something he hadn't felt since his training en route. Fear. Naruto saw the flicker of emotion in Sai's eyes and stayed his hand for the moment. He snarled once more before smirking menacingly. His glowing crimson-slitted eyes shifted back to their natural blue, but he tightened his hold on Sai's throat and pinned him high enough against the tree so only his toes barely touched the ground. Sai's face contorted in discomfort but didn't say anything even as his breathing was somewhat restricted. He was intending to swipe at Naruto with his tanto to get free but his left arm just wouldn't move for some reason. Naruto's smirk was still on his face as he seemed to search over Sai's expressionless face with curiosity. So, this puppet can feel fear. Tell me, how do you get around with a hand shoved so far up your asshole and controlling you from within? Your insults will not work on me. I am curious how someone as dickless as you was able to detect me tailing you, though. Sai spoke as if he was talking about the weather, his empty black eyes boring into Naruto's. The blonde laughed maliciously. You think I'm going to let you take that kind of information back to that old fossil? I've known about you ever since you started tailing me. I've been the model citizen during all the time, haven't I? Nothing out of place about me, I assume. No new information on my abilities, correct? His smirk widened when he saw Sai's eyes flash with some irritation at the lost time spying since any information he gathered so far were likely all irrelevant now. You know about my master. Of course. It's hard not to when Hokage Gigi vaguely warned me about him and I was too curious to ignore this. I just asked for information from someone else one day and got a lot more than I expected. Who told you? Sai fished, knowing Danzo would want this source eliminated. He grimaced when his captor tightened his fingers around the throat some more, cutting off the air for the moment. I'm the one holding your life in my hands, not you. You don't get to ask questions here. Naruto chided with a wagging finger as if he was talking down to a toddler before loosening his hold enough to let in air again. Sai just remained silent. I don't care about getting any information out of you because I know that's a waste of time. To prove it, he forcefully grabbed Sai's cheeks with his free hand and squeezed painfully hard, forcing the mouth open to expose an odd-looking seal on the tongue. Huh. There's the binding seal. Just like my informant said. He observed offhandedly for a second before releasing Sai's cheeks and moving on. Instead, I'm going to talk by myself here for a minute. I have to admit I was a bit curious about you since you suddenly joined our class at the beginning of this year. That was unusual enough by itself. Then I noticed your emotionless persona and I just immediately knew you're with Root. If you're trying to be discreet, that didn't work. Just thought you'd know. As a somewhat famous prankster who manages to prank the entire Anbu regularly wearing all orange, my opinion on discretion probably holds a lot of sway with some people. Naruto added as an aside while Sai continued to stare at him blankly. I assumed the reason you were inserted into the class was either because of the Uchiha, Prince of the Assholes, or me, the friendly neighborhood Jinchuriki. When I noticed you following me, it answered that question since I was wondering when old Danzo was going to try something with me. I figured it was well past time that flaccid old cripple. He was stopped by a flash of anger in Sai's eyes before the Root agent swung his tanto with all his effort at Naruto's neck. The calm blonde was expecting it as he caught his left arm by the forearm easily and, with no warning to Sai, squeezed it hard enough to snap both the radius and ulna bones. Sai allowed a grunt of pain as his now useless arm dropped the tanto, but he still kept his smoldering glare fixed on Naruto's cool gaze. Anger is something else this puppet feels too. Don't worry, I made sure they were clean breaks. They'll heal quickly when you go to a medic later. Now, before I was rudely interrupted. Naruto paused for a moment with a raised eyebrow before continuing. It was well past time that flaccid old cripple was starting to get interested in my business because I'm the big scary Jinchuriki he can't control. As much as I'd like to run to Hokage Gigi and tattle on this old fossil, I figured if I just acted normal, he'd lose interest and move on to annoy other people with his little secret club. Naruto spoke easily, but Sai felt some pressure in the air building up around the two of them. His eyes changed from anger to uncertainty. A bead of sweat went down his right temple as he watched Naruto close his eyes for a moment before opening to reveal glowing crimson eyes once again and his blackening lips pulled back to bare his fangs. Sai saw some red chakra seeping out of the blonde's body, making his body shiver involuntarily. The intimidating chakra then began to form a shape behind over Naruto's shoulder, and it resembled a certain large fox's head. And it was grinning sinisterly. However, it all changed when you were watching me with my friends today. That went beyond unacceptable. I was perfectly fine letting you see what I'm allowing you to see as long it was just me. When you got someone else involved, all bets are off. Naruto roared into Sai's face, making him tremble involuntarily with a small whimper despite his emotional training. The fox's head grinned wider as if it sensed weakness before it opened its large maw, revealing sharp teeth, and it snapped at his face repeatedly as if preparing to chew it off. With each snap of its jaw, the chakra's terrible presence increased, pressing down on every single inch of Sai's body. His eyes were wide with terror and he felt like he was going to suffocate under the combination of Naruto's anger and the chakra's pressure. He couldn't help it when his entire body trembled violently and his breaths were coming short and hard. This has gone on long enough. You're lucky that if I left your body rotting here, it'll create a hassle for me, especially when I'm going to graduate soon. Instead, I'm going to leave you here with these broken bones as reminder that your little spy game is over. Tell that senile old fool that if I ever catch you or anyone else spying on even a pebble in my presence again, I'll gladly deposit the bodies in front of the Hokage Tower in broad daylight for all to see with, "Return to Shimura Danzo," clearly written on them. I doubt he would like that. Naruto growled before his feral features slowly retracted and the red chakra disappeared instantly. He then abruptly slammed the root agent's head against the tree to make his point, making Sai's vision explode with stars. The blonde released his hold and Sai sank to his knees coughing with his usable hand clutching at his abused throat, and he was fighting back the lull of unconsciousness. Naruto took a torn satchel, which contained some art supplies and a small book, out of his jacket, silently dropped it with a light thump, and gave the still trembling Sai one last glare before he turned around and started walking away. Remember this, I had no reason to leave you alive, let alone even return that worn book that's apparently important to you. You should also thank Hinata-chan for the fact the rest of your bones aren't broken like your forearm. You just came close to death in an ill-advised spying mission that failed from the very onset. Think about that in your choice in bosses. Naruto's calm voice carried out into the air before he stepped into the thick foliage, back toward Hinata. Sai watched his retreating back until he was no more. Now alone, he let out a piteous whimper as he reached for the satchel and dragged it in to hug it tightly to his chest. He then drew himself into a fetal position, trembling at how he barely survived his close-up view of the devil. A few minutes later, Naruto-kun, Hinata called out as she stood up from the tree, desperately hiding how hard it was for her to keep standing with her legs still feeling a little like jelly from her previous sensations. Naruto smiled brightly and waved as he came into view from out of the forest. Was everything okay while I was gone? He nonchalantly asked, not noticing the blush on Hinata's face as she remembered what she had been thinking about over the past 15 minutes. Everything's fine. I hope you didn't hurt Sai-san too much. Hinata tried to direct the conversation to a new subject as they resumed walking toward the village. Nothing a medic couldn't fix. I think he knows to stay away now, though. Naruto cheerfully replied, ignoring the exasperated sigh from Hinata. Naruto-kun. She dragged out warningly as she started to bring up her patented glare. Naruto quickly backed up and brought his hands up defensively. Whoa. I held back, okay. I wanted to do a lot more to him. He should be happy he made off with a couple broken bones that medics can fix in almost an instant, and that was only because he tried to attack me even when he was at a complete disadvantage. Hinata let out a defeated sigh and decided that was good enough for now. They resumed walking again in silence for a moment before Naruto broke the silence. Hinata-chan. Yes, Naruto-kun. What's that smell? It smells like… Ah. I just remembered. I'm late for training with father and I have to run ahead. Bye. Hinata's panicked voice was already fading toward the village as she left a stunned Naruto in the dust. Why did this remind me of the reactions from Yugao-san and Anko-chan from back then? He finally asked no one in particular. Kurama kept silent as she struggled with everything she had to not laugh uproariously at her host's confusion. Later that evening in an unknown location the tension in the dark and barren office was thick enough to cut with a sword as Sai, his left arm encased in a brace for the mending bones, silently awaited his master's reaction on one knee. He had just relayed everything that happened in the forest and now Danzo was staring down at his pawn with his one cold eye. This is most distressing. He finally said after a few minutes of considering what Sai had to report. He did not like how Uzumaki Naruto had been acting lately, and now this little shit had made a mockery of him and his entire organization with his actions and words. It seemed apparent that Naruto might not necessarily put this village's security above his personal friend's safety if they didn't correspond with each other. The root leader frowned in frustration as he was reminded again of Sarutobi Hiruzan's constant refusal to have Naruto trained as an emotionless weapon unable to go against Konohagakure. He knew the Jinchuriki was training himself and that one of his senseis was Jiraiya, a student of Hiruzen that also advocated that blasted philosophy of peace. Beyond this, he didn't have enough information and that was unacceptable to him. Feeling like this was getting out of his control, he made a decision. Sai, watching the slight twitching of muscles on Danzo's face, easily deduced his master was about to make a knee-jerk reaction to his growing inability to keep the Jinchuriki under his personal control. He had an hunch this was going to end badly for everyone involved. However, he was not trained to trust his hunches and who was he to countermand his master's teachings. The fact that Naruto had given him a lot to think about would have to wait for another time. You're dismissed. We will discuss your failure later. Danzo said coldly as he watched Sai silently nod his head in acknowledgement and vanished from sight. The grizzled old man then took out a blank scroll and wrote down some information for someone that would be very interested in the recent development. If he couldn't have his weapon, then he wanted it out of Konoha at least. Having no weapon was better than having one that could turn around and aim in your direction, in his opinion. Friday evening at Yamanaka Flowers, the bell above the store's front door chimed and Ino looked up from the counter to see her friend, Hinata, walk in. They smiled happily upon seeing each other. Ino was wearing normal civilian clothes, a purple t-shirt, white capri pants, and white civilian sandals. Hinata wore her usual overcoat, but under it was a simple black t-shirt, a pair of black pants, and her black ninja sandals. Welcome to this humble and undeserving establishment. How may I help you, Lady Hyuga? Ino jokingly simpered like a saleswoman. Hinata giggled at the silliness. Are you about to get off work, Ino-chan? Not just yet. Ino muttered as she looked up at the clock which just struck 6. On now I'm off. I have to close up though so I'll need to do that, then let mom and dad know where I'm going. She said as she hopped over to the front door to flip the sign to closed, and grabbed a broom from a nearby nook. Actually, I want to buy something from this shop to take to Naruto-kun's. I intend for it to be a thank you present from us for drawing the seals. I also would like it to serve a second, but more important, purpose. Hinata explained. Ino raised an eyebrow at her friend while she was sweeping the floor. Since it's also a present from me too, it's only fair you don't pay for it. I mean, we run a large store. One pot of anything isn't going to be missed. She offered. Hinata almost wanted to protest, but decided to let her friend have this one since she knew more about plants and how this store was run. So what's the second purpose? Ino queried as she moved on to sprinkling the plants with some water to tide them over for the night. It needs to have a pleasant fragrance strong enough to fill a room but gentle on Naruto-kun's sensitive nose. It should be something that's easy to take care of and it can go without water for some time. It also should be visually appealing enough to Naruto-kun for him to keep it around in the living room and nowhere else in his apartment. Hinata listed out her ideal plant. Ino put the sprinkler away and struck a thoughtful pose. I know of a few species that fits what you want, and the good news is that we have an overstock on one of them. We were going to get rid of some to free up space, so this solves that problem since it's not going to be missed at all. She exclaimed, happy at this being an easy enough request to fulfill. Now that I'm done cleaning, I'll need to do some quick potting in the back to prepare the plant for Naruto's place. It'll only take a minute if you don't mind. She then offered, to which Hinata nodded enthusiastically, looking forward to seeing what her friend came up with. After a few minutes of working and slipping into the attached house to quickly clean herself up and inform her parents where she was going, the platinum blonde came back out into the shop carrying a medium-sized pot with 3 long wooden stakes stuck straight into the fertilizer that rose 3 feet into the air. At the base of each of the stakes were 2 beautiful violet flowers formed into several tightly clustered racemes hanging upside down. Hinata were in awe of their beauty, and then the fragrance hit her nose. The scent was somewhat strong but not too sweet or spicy, and it reminded her of the aftermath of a summer rainstorm. She knew immediately this was a good choice. Ino-chan, I just know Naruto-kun would love this. As always, you're great with flowers. She praised excitedly while Ino ducked her head in embarrassment. These are called wisteria. It's easy to take care of and can survive on little water. I'm sure you also noticed it smells great. Naruto will have to watch these little troublemakers though, as they like to grow fast and they try to crawl up the nearest vertical surface, which is why I have the stakes set up. This is perfect. It'll do the job nicely. I'm getting the feeling this is more for our benefits than Naruto's. Spit out. What aren't you telling me, Hinata-chan? Ino looked at her friend with some suspicion. Hinata chuckled nervously and considered what to say to the blonde. If you're ready, I'll tell you on the way. And with that, the girls left the store with a pot of wisteria in tow. Okay, Ino-chan. You know we're going over to Naruto-kun's to have the seal painted on us. Hinata began with a blush. Ino blushed at the implications of that activity as well. You've always known how much I love Naruto-kun. Hinata murmured shyly, and Ino smiled, happy she was trusted with that information long ago. Though she had to ignore a small pang of pain in her chest when she thought about how her friend would have most of Naruto's attention soon enough. Of course. Lastly, our bodies are now changing and we're feeling some new things. Right. A nose unsure reply didn't surprise Hinata, as this was a tangent no one was expecting. Anyo, this is embarrassing, but I trust you not to tell anyone else. I've begun imagining myself with Naruto-kun in various ways. Why you mean like KK kissing and stuff? Ino stuttered, not expecting this topic at all. And more than that, Hinata's frank admission was enough to send the blonde's imagination into overdrive, and she blushed at the images. I see. I'll admit I've been having some thoughts like that sometimes. She admitted, and she faintly remembered all those thoughts always seemed to involve Naruto in one way or another. She mentally shook that train of thought off before it led into dangerous territory. I still don't see what this has to do with the wisteria. We're going to see Naruto-kun in a private setting. I'm going to show my bare back to him. I'm going to feel a little thrill when I wonder if I would accidentally flash him somehow at some point. Then he's going to be touching gently and carefully all over my skin with these calloused hands of his as he draws the seal. Do you understand where I'm coming from? Hinata painted the likely scenario, her cheeks flaming red as she imagined it all being done to her. She knew Ino got it as she watched her friend's pale skin turn bright red as well. Yes, I'm going to be incredibly aroused, and it will be frustrating when I can't act on it until the next time I'm alone. She added. Ino kept her gaze on the ground as her head continued to look like a tomato. She was now feeling some heat spread through her body as she imagined the delightful scenario Hinata described, only she was taking her friend's place. Naruto-kun has a sensitive nose, and I've discovered recently he's able to easily smell arousal coming from any female. That's why I wanted the wisteria. It'll likely be the dominant scent in the room, and Naruto-kun won't focus too much on the other scent. Hinata finally got to the point of her little plan. Ino looked over at her friend in shock, her heated imagination forgotten. You know all this and you're still going through with this. I want the resistance seal, and I trust only him to draw any seal on any part of my body. No one else. If everything goes right in the future, we'll likely be dating, and I won't mind him knowing how much he turns me on. But, right now, it's just a little embarrassing, and I wanted to avoid having him catch on for a while longer. It's okay if you want to back out. I wouldn't blame you. What? Hinata-chan, what makes you think I would get excited by Naruto? It's going to be completely professional between us tonight. Ino stammered, though Hinata saw uncertainty in her eyes and smiled somewhat pityingly at her friend's denial. Ino knew Hinata didn't believe her. Even she didn't believe herself either, damn it. She was beginning to see him less like a goofy runt of a brother she met when they were 5 and more like a growing man that had a lot of what she was going to want in her ideal man. As she was dwelling on that thought, a pleasant jolt shot through her spine and she howled in shock in the middle of a street that was empty by chance. After gritting through a violent shudder and quickly glancing around to see if anyone else saw her sudden outburst, she glared back at a smirking Hinata, removing a single finger from running it down her friend's spine lightly. You're very sensitive to touch, Ino-chan. I'm jealous, you'll be enjoying tonight a lot more than I'm going to. She remarked with an airy tone, then giggled. Ino narrowed her eyes. You know, sometimes I wonder if the world is ready for a mischievous and confident Hyuga Hinata. I don't understand why you're only this way with me and Hanabi-chan. It's not like Naruto's going to hate you if you're like this around him. She wondered. Hinata blushed at the mention of his name. I don't know, I just feel shy around him. I can't explain it. She struggled with her answer just as the girls reached the entrance to Naruto's apartment building. Both girls let out a sigh. Ready? They asked each other at the same time, making them start, then they chuckled nervously. They nodded silently this time and walked in. A minute later, one Uzumaki Naruto opened the door to his apartment, revealing his 2 female friends. Good evening, ladies. I hope everything's alright. I have a clone making tea for us now. He greeted with a bright smile as he stepped aside to let Hinata and Ino in before closing the door. The girls noticed he was wearing a loose dark blue tank top with a black pair of sport shorts. It was what he jokingly called his super awesome ceiling outfit, since he'd picked the outfit to minimize the mess on his everyday clothes as he practiced his fuinjutsu skills. They noted some bolts of ink peppering his exposed skin, apparently from his time with the boys earlier in the afternoon. The outfit, which displayed his muscular arms, strong neck, and impressive pectorals, was not going to help Hinata control her hormones, and she could tell her blonde counterpart was going to have the same issue from her blatant ogling. She gently elbowed her friend in the ribs when Naruto was not looking in their direction, making Ino jump slightly and gulp. Everything's great. She chirped a little too brightly, making Hinata almost roll her eyes in exasperation. Naruto noticed the gift in the brunette's hands. That smells good, he commented as he looked carefully at the potted plant. Anyo, we made sure it's not too harsh on your nose. Ino-chan and I wanted to give you a small thank you gift for doing the seal on us. I know there might be some awkward moments tonight and we appreciate your willingness to deal with anything for us. Hinata explained with a shy smile. Naruto struck his usual sheepish pose with a nervous smile. If we do everything right, we won't have anything to worry about. He assured the girls. Ino shook her head. Nevertheless, we trust you whatever may happen, so don't be nervous. Naruto nodded and gently took the potted plant from Hinata's hands and set it on the coffee table in the living room. The 2 girls exchanged glances and shared a mischievous grin. I was thinking about getting a plant with some nice fragrance for the upcoming summer. Sort of like a natural air freshener in this room. I'm glad to see you girls took care of that with these wisteria. Thank you. Naruto said sincerely, shocking Ino completely. She wasn't expecting him to even know the name. While the wisteria thrived in this country's climate, it was still a plant that grew up mostly in the more humid land of water. She had to admit his impressive knowledge about plants was hot. Naruto, seeing the shocked look, had a twitching eyebrow. Oi, it is really that unbelievable that I knew something about this flower, Ino-chan. He grumbled, making her jump. Oh, I know you're smart but I just wasn't expecting you to know something about a non-native plant. She tried to cover up her flustered reaction. Naruto grinned and shrugged. As you know already, I keep a few plants around this place. He swept his arm out at the various plants littering the apartment. I read books on the best way to take care of them, so that's how I learned about this plant. I just didn't expect it to smell this good and it's not bothering my nose at all. You ladies made a good choice. Both girls beamed at his praise. Meanwhile, Hinata was watching Ino's reaction to Naruto's unexpected knowledge on plants and she just knew he unwittingly scored a ton of points with the flower crazy girl. Yet this still didn't bother her at all as she watched Ino look at Naruto in a different light. She decided to stop wondering about the odd lack of jealousy when it came to Naruto and Ino for the night and just deal with anything as they came for now. How did it go with the boys earlier this afternoon? She decided to get some light conversation going. Naruto grimaced a little. Imagine me crammed into this living room with 4 shirtless and grunting boys. They were still sweaty from the spars at the academy earlier today and, at least to my sense of smell, they stunk up the room. That's why I was thinking about getting some new plants to get rid of any lingering odor. The girls giggled at their friend's small misfortune. It was funny when I finished doing the seal on Shika, though. He didn't get up from the floor or even moved a single finger for 5 minutes. When I asked him what was wrong, he complained it was too troublesome to move because of the seal. He drawled out the last bit in his impersonation of Shikamaru, making the girls snort with laughter. His smirk widened as he delivered the punchline. I told him that I finished drawing the seal but it wasn't activated yet. He finished with a vulpine grin, making the girls collapse onto the couch with renewed laughter. Just then, a clone came in from the kitchen carrying cups of tea for its creator and the guests. The 3 made more conversation as they drank their tea. Despite the light talk, they all knew what was coming and a slight but nervous tension began to fill the air. When they finished their tea, all fell silent as the 3 young teens looked down nervously at the empty cups in their laps. It was Ino that finally broke the silence. I guess we should get started. The sooner we do this, the quicker we'll move on to other things. She finally said with her gaze still focused on her cup, a light dusting of red on her cheeks. Naruto took in a deep breath and let it out slowly to relax. Who'd like to go first? I'll do it, Hinata said quickly. Naruto nodded as he got up from his chair and stretched. Then he reached for a stack of prepared towels and handed one to her. I'm going to prepare a bowl of ink in my bedroom. That will take about 5 minutes. Use the time to get completely topless and lay out the towel on the floor, then lie face down on it. I will call out before I enter this room to make sure you're ready. That way I won't see anything you wouldn't want me to see. Drawing the seal will take about 15 minutes. I could do it a lot faster but I want to be absolutely sure that every single bit of the seal is not out of order. He spoke with a professional tone but a small blush forced its way onto his cheeks anyway. Hinata nodded resolutely to show that she understood. With that, he stepped out of the room. I like how he explained everything to us at the beginning. He was making sure we knew what was coming so we'd be more comfortable. Ino whispered from her place on the couch as she watched Hinata shrug off her overcoat, revealing a tight black t-shirt that didn't hide her growing bust at all. Even though she was still growing, Ino doubted very much she would catch up with Hinata in the bust department when they became full-fledged adults. I know. That's one of the many reasons why I love him. He was always considerate and would gladly put his friend's safety and comfort ahead of his own. Even when he hadn't had his training, he jumped into a crowd of bullies without a second thought to protect me, even though it was the first time we met. We didn't even know each other's names until when he saved me from that Kumo nin a few months later. Hinata whispered back, making sure Naruto didn't hear with his sensitive ears. She pulled the shirt off, revealing a white silk adult bra. It was conservatively styled but it clearly showed the perfect teardrop shape of her breasts and their size were clearly C-cup. I know about your size and everything but it really annoys me when I actually see your boobs for real. The fact you're already wearing an adult bra compared to the training ones for the rest of us is a slap in our faces too. Ino growled out quietly, her eyebrows twitching with envy. I can't help it. It shouldn't even be possible for me. Almost all the women in my clan, including my own mother, are smaller than this and I don't know why I'm the only one that's still growing. I'm already getting looks of betrayal from the others, including my own little sister. Hinata whispered back in a frustrated tone as she finished unclasping her bra, letting it fall off her shoulders. She blushed and tried to cover her naked bust with her hands under a nose-twitching glare as she made her way over to the towel that was carefully laid next to the coffee table where the wisteria sat in order maximize the chance of the fragrance covering up what would be her obvious arousal. She then laid down on it face down, exposing her back to the world as she pulled her long indigo hair to the side out of the way and tucked her folded arms into her sides to hide any side view of her breasts. A few seconds later, Naruto's voice called out loudly and clearly from the hallway. I'm ready. Are you decent, Hinata-chan? Yes. You may come in. Naruto spent the past 5 minutes mentally preparing for this when he stepped into the living room with a brush and a bowl of special ink in his hands. However, he still couldn't help but gulp as his eyes took in the wonderful expanse of pale and smooth skin on Hinata's back that looked like caressing it would be one of the worst sins in the world. He shook himself out of his brief daze and cleared his throat. The first thing I'm going to do is kneel next to you at your hips and I will set down my sealing stuff. He clearly announced in a professional tone. The girls appreciated Naruto going out of his way to make sure they were comfortable with him by explaining what he was going to do next. I am going to put both my hands on your back for a moment to clear away any possible stray hair, thread, or lint from your shirt. It's to make sure nothing would physically interfere with the seal being drawn on. Naruto said as he finished kneeling next to Hinata. Her breathing hitched slightly before she slowly nodded her head and her entire body shivered slightly with anticipation. Naruto gulped a little before he reached down and lightly touched his hands to the small of her back. He knew right away as he felt the texture of Hinata's skin that this was 100 times better than silk and he felt like he was committing a great sin, and getting away with it. He used the brief time to burn the texture into his memory. Hinata used everything she had to hold in her loud gasp of appreciation as she felt her secret love's calloused hands touch her back directly for the very first time in her life. Naruto couldn't see Hinata's face from where he was kneeling but Ino clearly saw it from where she was sitting next to Hinata's head to offer any support if needed. She had to admit watching her friend's eyes flutter, her jaw clenching to hold back any sound of arousal, her hands coiling into tight fists underneath her chest, and her toes curling inward was awe-inspiring. Did his hands truly feel that good? She knew she was even more sensitive. How was she going to deal with this? Hinata felt like the brief period of time that Naruto was caressing her were the longest in her life as she felt shockwaves of intense heat spread throughout her body and it took all she had not to instinctively arc her back upward for more of his wonderful touch. When he reached the top of her shoulders and removed his hands, now finished clearing her back of any possible debris, Hinata then felt like that brief moment was far too short and she couldn't resist a disappointed groan at the sudden loss of contact. You alright, Hinata-chan? Naruto asked, concerned. I'm fine. I'm a little ticklish and I was making sure not to move around under your touch. Please continue, Naruto-kun. Hinata lied quickly, keeping her obvious desire for a lot more than a brief moment out of her voice. Okay. Now I'm going to actually draw the seal. I need to make sure it's perfectly centered on your back so I need to somewhat straddle your hips to line your spine with my sightline. I'm not going to sit on you so don't worry. Naruto assured. Ino had to stifle a giggle when she saw Hinata's disgruntled expression that clearly said, I would absolutely love it if you sat on me and let me feel more of you. Stop being so damn noble. Instead, she quietly nodded her consent and Naruto shifted his position so he would be kneeling on one side of Hinata's hips and using his other foot on the other side to support himself over Hinata without unnecessarily touching any of her body. She let herself relax as she heard Naruto dip his brush into the bowl of ink. She knew this part wasn't going to be erotic. Naruto was all business when he was drawing seals. As if to prove that, a cold and wet brush touched down and drew 2 long lines slowly across the small of her back making her flinch a little until she settled down. Those strokes weren't part of the matrix. He only did this to get whoever he was drawing on used to the shock of the cold ink and the feel of the brush so they wouldn't squirm when he was trying to draw the matrix for real. Then he immediately went to work. Hinata was glad the initial shock of the cold ink blew away most of her budding arousal and she was able to relax and enjoy his work on her. She was in awe as she felt Naruto's drawing beginning to pick up speed. It was like a blur on her skin to her and she couldn't believe how many individual strokes the seal required yet they were all so compressed onto the small space of her slim back. As she looked up at Ino's awestruck expression aimed in the direction of Naruto, she knew her friend was thinking the same thing. Before she knew it, she wasn't feeling any new brushstroke anymore. Alright, I'm done. You did good keeping still. We'll give the ink a few minutes to dry then you'll activate it with your chakra. That's all that's needed to key this seal to you so you can control it yourself. Naruto announced as he got up to go into the kitchen and wash the brush. Ino leaned in to whisper. How was it, Hinata-chan? It felt great at the start, Hinata almost purred with a satisfied looking grin. Ino smirked. Yeah, I saw that. Then everything went smoothly after that. He was considerate and professional about this. Think I'll be okay then? Ino asked in a worried tone. When she said she was very sensitive to touch, she really meant it. You'll be fine, Ino-chan. You got me with you in case of anything. I can even do your back instead of Naruto-kun if that'll help. Would it be okay if I let him do that part? It looked like it felt wonderful. Ino shyly said with a blush and a worried look in her eyes. She knew Naruto pretty much belonged to Hinata from the onset and she didn't want any bad blood. She was surprised to see a knowing smile on her friend's face. Ino-chan, I feel like there's more to Naruto-kun for you than being his friend and enjoying his good looks. Something happened in the past to change your view of him. I assume it was at around the same time you dropped the kun suffix for Sasuke-san. Hinata whispered out her deduction and she knew she was right when she saw the panicked look on Ino's face. She hurried to assure the platinum blonde. Don't worry. I trust you and I trust Naruto-kun to treat both of us with equal attention, respect, and kindness. I honestly don't think there's anything you'd ever do that would make me feel threatened or hurt my feelings. Aside from selfishly keeping a certain person's attention only to yourself. She said all of this with a smile, but Ino felt the underlying threat of bodily harm in that last sentence. She swallowed and nodded her head with an uncertain smile. She was also wondering why she felt so relieved and happy at Hinata's clear acceptance of her closeness to Naruto. I'll tell you the story soon after we're done with this. She promised just before Naruto's voice snapped them out of their little world. I'm coming back into the living room. Yes, they both replied at the same time. He appeared and announced he was going to closely inspect the seal matrix. After a moment of looking over it, he declared it perfect. He turned his back to the girls and closed his eyes so Hinata would be able to sit up to use hand seals freely. Okay, channel as much chakra as you can into your back. He called out. Hinata put her hands into a ram sign and concentrated on sending her chakra to the seal. For a moment it didn't do anything, then she felt a large drain on her reserves as the seal absorbed most of her chakra to activate. She now felt a little tired and her breathing became short momentarily. It's disappearing. Ino announced for Hinata when she saw the seal glow and fade into nothing on her friend's back. Great. That means it worked. It's not doing anything right now but you can control it anytime. I'll leave for a minute to let you get dressed and we'll test the seal real quick. Naruto said as he stepped out of the room to leave the girls alone. A few minutes later, a fully dressed Hinata was standing in front of Naruto. All you have to do is put your hands into this special seal and then clearly call out the number according to the level you want the seal to be at. Like 1, for level 1 and so on. He explained as he put his hands into the specific hand sign to show the girls. The girls then practiced the new sign for a minute. If you need to turn off the seal, just use that sign and shout, Kai. It'll stay off until you reactivate it again to the level you want next time. Nodding, Hinata did the special seal and then clearly said, 1. She felt something ripple throughout her entire body and her arms instantly felt a little heavy. She tried moving them around and encountered actual resistance. However, it didn't feel like she was trying to move through water like Shikamaru described it. It just slowed her down a small bit, and she wondered if she was going to move on to level 2 like Naruto did. Naruto-kun, may I test it on you? Hinata asked as she shifted her body into an attacking kata. Naruto just smiled for confirmation. Before Ino could even try to say it was a bad idea to fight in someone's living room, Hinata struck fast and true with her right hand in a two-fingered thrust, following an almost unpredictable path using her natural flexibility, toward Naruto's left temple. The blonde caught the hand easily with a casual expression when it was less than an inch from its target, and he held it firmly at the wrist. The force of the strike being stopped suddenly generated a small gust, blowing all three's hair back a little. This was a shock to Hinata, as evidenced by her wide-eyed expression. So it did make a difference. I should not move on to the next level until I can slip that past you again. Naruto nodded as he let go of her hand, satisfied with her conclusion. What are you talking about, Hinata-chan? That was plenty fast and powerful to me. Ino commented from between Naruto and Hinata while she combed a hand through her long hair to smooth out any stray from that gust. It might be to most people, but the fact is Naruto-kun easily caught my strike when I threw it as fast and hard as I could. Hinata said as she tested her seal by walking around doing random movements with her limbs. What do you mean? I know you're his best training partner, but I've always seen him win over you in your spars. Tell me, Ino-chan. Did you ever see me manage to block or catch any of Hinata-chan's hand strikes lately? Naruto interjected, his eyes shining with admiration for Hinata's ability to deal with level 1 of the resistance seal easily thanks to her own training. He knew it wouldn't be long before she moved on to level 2. Now that you mention it, even though you usually won, you've always did your best to dodge her and never tried to grapple with her unless it was an absolutely sure thing. That's right. I could see them coming, but I could never move in time to catch her hands. She's that fast. The fact I easily saw that strike coming and caught it as if it was in slow motion meant the seal really is slowing her down. It's only by a small fraction, but it's working. He explained. Hinata came back to the two. Now that we know my seal's working, it's time for yours, Ino-chan. She said with a slightly teasing smile. She knew Ino was a little nervous about retrieving Naruto's attention. The platinum blonde blushed. A few minutes later had Naruto stepping out to allow Ino to strip off her shirt and the camisole that was covering her budding bust. Hinata rolled her eyes as she watched Ino glare back and forth between their breasts, grumbling under her breath. Ino-chan, it's useless worrying about that just when you're starting to grow. You will be a beautiful woman in your own right and you shouldn't worry about others' looks anyway. It's easy for you to say that when you're sitting there with your C-cups. Ino quipped, but it was good-natured and she was glad for Hinata's encouragement. She laid down on her stomach with her arms acting as her pillow, not having any side boob for Naruto to accidentally glance at. Naruto came back into the living room with a new brush. He was just as enticed by the soft and curvy look of Ino's back as he was with Hinata's, but he needed to get this over with. He then repeated what he did with Hinata, announcing his intention before doing it. As he knelt next to Ino and was preparing to touch his hands to her back, he was stopped. Wait, Naruto-kun. I need to warn you that she's very sensitive to touch. She would be very ticklish. Hinata said for Ino's sake, who she noticed was getting too nervous to even warn Naruto about something like that. Hinata-chan. Ino groaned out in embarrassment over her weakness. We know how Naruto-kun would act if you reacted loudly to his touch. He would think he hurt you and panic, perhaps making the situation worse than it should have been. Hinata calmly stated with a grin at Naruto's affronted expression. Oi. I'm right here. And am I really that clumsy? Naruto grumbled while the girls giggled at his expense. After it died down, Hinata reached out and grabbed a hold of Ino's hand for assurance, who sighed nervously before clearing her throat. Okay, I'm ready, Naruto. As soon as Naruto touched Ino's back, her reaction was predictably more extreme than Hinata's. She let out a open-mouthed gasp as her eyes widened to impossible proportions. Her entire being wanted her to actually moan out throatily as she felt Naruto's wonderfully rough and scorching hot hands inch their way up her back, but she managed to turn that into a series of quick breaths and gasps, somehow passing that off as attempts to hold in her laughter to the remarkably clueless male doing this to her. Like with Hinata, the short time Naruto was caressing Ino's back felt like the longest period of time ever in her short life, and she actually didn't want this to end. All of her conscious thoughts were focused on telling herself not to beg sensually for more, before she noticed she was fading slowly into unconsciousness. The next thing she knew, she was still lying on her stomach and she knew right away Naruto was not by her. He just got done. He's washing the brush in the kitchen. The ink is drying, so don't move just yet, Ino-chan. Hinata's voice cut into her returning consciousness and she looked up to see her indigo-haired friend smiling gently, and her hand was still being held tightly. What happened? The last thing I remember was Naruto's hands on my back and it felt good. She whispered with an intense blush. That was when I applied my chakra to a certain tenketsu in your wrist. It connects to multiple chakra pathways in and around your brain. A gentle application of chakra would cause your body to relax instantly. That was why I took your hand. It was just in case you were about to lose it. Hinata admitted to Ino's wide-eyed shock. I was. It looked like you were about to beg for more, and at that point I wasn't sure if you would have cared about your modesty. Hinata stated with an understanding smile. Ino blushed bright red at the picture in her head. Hinata-chan, please tell me I didn't do anything stupid in front of him. She begged. You didn't. I just told Naruto-kun that you were trying not to laugh, and when I made you relax, I convinced him you were using a special clan technique to relax completely so you wouldn't be ticklish under his brush. He believed it all and finished everything like it was nothing. Hinata explained with a reassuring smile. Ino laughed suddenly. Funny thing is, my clan really do have a technique for that. She said before the girls broke into laughter. After a moment, Ino sighed with relief as she shifted her hips a little. Thank Kami you suggested the wisteria. I think I'm gonna have to change before I go to bed tonight. She admitted, making Hinata blush at the implication. The blonde girl continued. I honestly didn't want to show too much of this side of me to him. I was under the impression you at least admire and trust him, considering the fact you admitted he was responsible for changing your views on boys. Hinata pointed out with a raised eyebrow. He did. Because of him, I understand how important it is to meet a boy that genuinely appreciates me and cares for my welfare. Otherwise I might have learned that the hard way after many bitter disappointments. Before then, I was only interested in who was the coolest, not if he would treat me like a person or an object. Now I want to make sure that he cares about me as much as I would him. Even though Naruto did this for me, it didn't mean I'm automatically hot for him. I know he's going to be a great man in the future, but I want to wait and see what'll happen. So you don't have to worry about me trying to get his attention alongside you for now. Ino finished with a mischievous smirk. Something tells me I would have been fine with that, as long as it's friendly between us. Hinata admitted, much to Ino's admittedly pleasant surprise. They didn't get to talk anymore when Naruto announced his return. 5 minutes later, Ino was fully clothed and moving around getting used to her activated seal. Damn, how are you two not feeling this? I feel like I'm underwater completely and it's awkward making any movement. This'll take some getting used to. She remarked in awe as she rose an arm with some difficulty. It'll make you stronger and faster. Just use that for 2 weeks. You don't even have to try to spar with that on. Use it for everyday things, then turn it off at the end of the 2 weeks. You'll feel a huge difference then. After that, I'm sure you'd be happy to continue using it. Naruto assured with a smile. I'll take your word for it, Naruto. Thank you for doing this for us. I hope I didn't make anything awkward for you. Ino replied with a formal bow which Hinata copied as well. Naruto did his sheepish pose and laughed. I'm always happy to help my friends. As long as it helps keep anyone out of trouble in this dangerous world, I would do anything. He declared. Ino's eyes softened. I know you would. You already did something for me last year and I came out of it much better. I never did thank you for that, did I? She said with a shy smile. Don't worry about that. I did what I had to do. Naruto nervously waved it off, hoping to not bring it up again. He then was surprised when Ino wrapped her arms around his neck suddenly for a somewhat intimate hug. Really, thank you, she whispered. Naruto could only respond by hugging her back and they let go of each other with smiles. Hinata was watching this with interest. She would have to get that story out of Ino sooner or later. Eventually, it was time for Hinata and Ino to go home and Naruto volunteered to walk them. A 10-minute walk later had Naruto and Hinata bidding Ino goodnight at the Yamanaka flowers shop. Naruto and Hinata then started walking together to the Hyuga compound. They were now alone walking down some barely lit residential streets. Something was on Hinata's mind for the past week and she decided now was as good time as any to bring it up. Where's Anko-san? I haven't seen her around you lately. She ventured. I didn't tell you. She's been out on a long mission for the past 3 weeks. Told me she was going to take a squad and chase down a bunch of missing nin making some noise near the capital. She should be back soon though. Naruto nonchalantly replied with his arms behind his head. Hinata nodded in understanding. She had to admit to herself that her reaction to Anko suddenly popping into Naruto's life last summer was a little immature. To her, Anko was hanging out with Naruto as if they had been best friends since they were born. Hinata realized it was natural for her to feel threatened by Anko's boisterous and flirty attitude, especially with that amazing body of hers. The heiress was ashamed to admit she got jealous at how easily Naruto and Anko could just be themselves and get along while she herself remained reserved around him, even after years of close friendship. She wanted to blame some sort of trick Anko was pulling on Naruto for them to be friends so easily, but she should have known to trust her secret love's ability to judge people better than that. The more Hinata learned about the older woman, despite their slightly less than friendly competition for Naruto's attention, the more she realized Anko was a great and loyal companion to Naruto. She also had things that Hinata couldn't hope to have. There was Anko's independence to do and say exactly what she wanted and not care about what everyone else thought. Hinata couldn't do that because she had to uphold the reputation of the Hyuga clan as one of its representatives. The older girl also wore her heart on her sleeve and was almost always honest with herself around people she trusted all the time. If she decided she wanted to passionately kiss Naruto in the middle of a busy market district, she would have done it at that moment. In comparison, it made Hinata nearly faint at the very idea of being assertive and flirtatious with Naruto in public. Behind closed doors would be a very different story, however. She saw how Anko never took the few good things she had in life for granted and tried her best to nurture them, including her friendship with Naruto. Hinata had to admit she caught herself a few times taking the high likelihood she would be romantic with Naruto for granted and believed everything would fall into place as long as she just stood quietly by him. Realizing that, along with watching Anko actively cultivating her relationship with Naruto, lit a fire under her the past few months, and she was now also actively getting closer to him and getting him to notice her as a growing woman. Lastly, Hinata knew about Anko's situation and how similar it was to Naruto's. Because of that, the young Junin could completely understand how Naruto felt about dealing with the village's hatred. They were able to take comfort in each other whenever something happened within the village for either. Despite her best efforts, not even Hinata could provide that kind of support for him. All she was able to do is offer soothing words and hope for the best. She already could see how happy and content Naruto was making Anko, and they didn't even notice this. It didn't matter that Anko was 7 years older than them because her eyes did not deceive her as she watched how the purple-haired woman looked at Naruto lately, even if she hadn't realized she was doing that. Right now, Hinata decided she wanted to know something. Anyo, Naruto-kun, how do you really feel about Anko-san? She murmured quietly into the night air. Naruto clearly heard her and he turned his head. At first he was going to answer in his typical fashion, announce loudly she was a blood-sucking psychopath that was right at home in a blood bank or something like that. He stopped when he saw the look in Hinata's eyes and knew he had to take this seriously. They came to a stop and stared at each other in the middle of a dark street not far from the compound. The moon, in its last quarter phase, cast an eerie glow on the two of them, bringing out Hinata's expectant pale eyes, and they were beautiful to behold. Naruto felt himself fall into them for a moment before he shook it off and cleared his throat. I think. Lemon. Wait. I think we should cut it off here. Hazel. What? Seriously. I'm already 2/3 of the way to the 40,000 plus words count for this chapter. Lemon. Now that I think about it, isn't that too much awesome for even the most devoted listener? Instead we'll split this awesome chapter into 2 smaller but still awesome chapters. We'll post the next chapter at 2 hours from now. That'll give everyone time to weep at the awesomeness of this chapter, then they'll recover before they have to weep again when we post the next one. We'll dehydrate the listeners otherwise. Hazel. But to stop it here like that, even I think that's evil. Lemon. Better this than those 2 other scenes you thought up. Hazel. Wow, these are the most evil cliffhangers ever. I need to torture the readers with one of these. Lemon. No. Don't go down the dark, even darker path. Pick the lesser of the 3 evils. Bitch slaps Hazel. Hazel. Ow. Wow. Phew. Thanks for that, buddy. Lemon. Here. Have a lemon to calm down. While I took some creative license with the conversation above compared to the much less exciting real-life chat between 2 persons, the reason is pretty much the same. I decided we will split this chapter in half to make sure we get everything to you in a timely and orderly fashion. Think of this chapter as a peek into what's going on with Hinata at this point and how she was slowly coming to accept the likelihood of other girls falling for Naruto. Thanks for listening. I hope you guys liked it. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like for more what ifs and support the author. See you guys in the next video.